Hey friends! Glad you're here at Eclipse Wizardry. We've cooked up something special. What if Luna and Hermione saw Harry's soul brand age 9 and ancient magic declared them his equal queens? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Library and the Brand. The summer Harry Potter turned 9, the Dursleys decided he was old enough to be useful. This was not, in their estimation, a kindness. It was logistics. Petunia had her garden club on Wednesday afternoons, and Vernon had his lodge meetings, and Dudley had football practice that ran 3 hours and required a parent present to witness every single moment of it, as though the boy might otherwise cease to exist. This left a problem: what to do with the spare. The solution was the public library on Cavendish Street, which was 4 blocks from Privet Drive, opened at 9 in the morning, closed at 6 in the evening, and, crucially, was staffed by a woman named Mrs. Figg, who Petunia had somehow convinced to keep an eye on Harry without it costing them anything. Harry didn't know about this arrangement. He thought he'd simply been told to go and not come back until dinner. He didn't mind. The library smelled like old paper and radiator dust and something faintly sweet that he'd never been able to identify, and the woman at the front desk, Mrs. Alderton, had stopped asking him if he needed help finding something after the 3rd week and started simply nodding when he came in. He had a corner in the back, between the natural history section and a shelf of oversized atlases that nobody ever touched, and he had spent most of June working his way through every book about animals that had photographs. He wasn't particularly interested in animals. He was interested in the fact that no one bothered him there. He was reading about the migratory patterns of Arctic terns on the 2nd Wednesday in July when he first heard her. "That's not right," said a voice, clear and firm and deeply unimpressed. The bibliography is citing a 1987 source for potion classification, but the statute of classification was revised in 1991. This entire section is out of date. Harry looked up. A girl was standing 3 shelves down, holding a book with the kind of grip that suggested she was trying to keep herself from throwing it. She had brown hair that was doing several things at once, brown eyes that were currently aimed at the middle distance in the expression of someone doing rapid mental arithmetic, and she was talking entirely to herself, which Harry found reassuring. He did that too. She noticed him noticing her. "Sorry," she said, not sounding particularly sorry. "I'm Hermione Granger. Do you actually use these shelves, or are you just sitting there?" "Harry. And I'm just sitting here." She considered this acceptable and moved to the shelf nearest him, pulling out a book with the focused efficiency of someone who had done extensive pre-research before arriving. Harry watched her for a moment and then went back to his Arctic terns. For about 4 minutes. "What are you reading?" she asked. He showed her the cover. She made a sound that was not quite dismissive. "That series has good photography, but the taxonomy is outdated. The author lumped several subspecies that have since been reclassified." She paused. "Sorry. I do that." "It's fine," Harry said, and meant it. "What are you reading?" She held up her book. It was titled Unexplained Phenomena, A Rational Inquiry, and it was extremely thick. "I found anomalies," she said, as though this explained everything. When he didn't respond with alarm, she sat down cross-legged on the floor 3 feet away from him, opened the book to a page she'd already marked, and said, "Have you ever made something happen that you couldn't explain? Something physical, I mean. Objects moving. Lights going strange." Harry went very still. She looked up immediately. She was, he would learn, catastrophically perceptive. "You have. Things happen around me sometimes," he said carefully. This was the most he had ever said about it to anyone. "My aunt calls it, she says I'm being dramatic. I grew up my whole life being told I was imagining things," Hermione said flatly, "and then last month I accidentally set a book on fire because the boy next to me in class said I was wrong about the French Revolution, and I'm fairly certain that was not my imagination." She tapped the book in her lap. "I've been researching. There are documented cases. People who, the book calls them anomalous individuals, but I think that's a euphemism for something specific that they're choosing not to name directly. Harry stared at her. She stared back. I set a teacher's wig on fire, he offered. Her expression shifted into something that was almost a smile. When I was 7. She was giving me a detention for something Dudley did. Dudley is? My cousin. Right. She nodded like she was cataloging information. Do things happen more when you're angry or frightened? Both, he said. And sometimes when he stopped, because the word he was about to use was happy, and he didn't use that word very often out loud. Sometimes other times too. Hermione opened her mouth to say something else, and that was the precise moment the third person arrived. She didn't come through the main entrance. She came from the direction of the large print section, drifting between shelves with the unhurried movement of someone following a path that only she could see. She was small and blonde, with eyes so pale they were nearly silver, and she was wearing one earring that was clearly a radish and one that was a small brass gear, and she was carrying a book upside down, reading it. She stopped in front of Harry's corner as though she'd made an appointment. "Hello," she said. Her voice was soft and completely certain. "You're the one. I've been looking for you since Tuesday." Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance. "Luna Lovegood," the girl said, sitting down beside them as though invited. She set her upside-down book on her knee and looked at Harry with those pale eyes and said, "You have something on your arm. Not the one everyone looks at. The other one." The silence that followed was the loudest Harry had experienced since the time he'd accidentally blown out all the windows in the school gymnasium. "I don't know what you mean," he said, which was a lie, and they all knew it was a lie, because his left hand had gone immediately to his right forearm, the one with the lightning bolt scar, and Luna's gaze stayed fixed on his left. "You keep it covered," she said, not accusatory, just observational. "Long sleeves even in summer. But it shows sometimes, when you don't know people are looking. I saw it yesterday through the window while you were reaching for a shelf. It looked like it was glowing." "Luna," Hermione said carefully, "what exactly did you see?" "Lines," Luna said. "Like writing, but older than writing. The way a tree looks older than the forest it's standing in." She tilted her head at Harry. "May I see it?" Harry didn't move for a long moment. Then he pulled up his left sleeve. It wasn't always visible. Most of the time it looked like nothing, slightly paler skin, maybe, a faint discoloration that Vernon had once squinted at and then dismissed as a birthmark. But in the filtered afternoon light coming through the library's high windows, with two girls watching, something shifted. The mark on his forearm was not a scar. It wasn't raised or puckered or pink. It was more like a watermark on paper, present only at certain angles, in certain lights. Lines interlocking in a pattern that was simultaneously geometric and organic, like a constellation that had been folded through itself. It pulsed, very slightly, the way an ember pulses when you breathe on it. "Oh," Hermione said. It came out small and stunned, which was clearly not a sound she made often. Luna reached out and stopped an inch from touching it. "Is it all right if I don't know," Harry said honestly. Luna nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer and withdrew her hand. Instead she looked at him with those silver eyes and said, "My mother studied ancient magic before she died. She said there were marks like this recorded in texts going back to the founding period. Before the ministry. Before the schools. She called them covenant brands." She paused. "She said they only appear on people who are," she used the word, "sovereign." I was 8, so I wrote it down, but I didn't know what it meant yet. "It means," Hermione said, and her voice had gone the way it did when she'd found the answer to something that had been troubling her, self-governing. Independent of external authority. She looked at Harry. "How long have you had it?" "Always," he said. "As long as I can remember." What happened next was not loud. There was no crack of thunder, no flash of light, no dramatic atmospheric disturbance. It was quieter than that, which made it more frightening. The mark on Harry's arm brightened, not glowed, brightened, the way a room brightens when someone opens a door, and the warmth that moved through him was familiar enough that he didn't flinch. He'd felt it before, in fragments. During the worst moments at the Dursleys, when something deep and wordless had moved through him like a voice saying no, not this. When Dudley's gang had cornered him behind the school and he'd somehow ended up on the roof. Small moments of inexplicable grace. But this was not a fragment. This was the whole sentence. And then Hermione made a sharp sound and looked down at her own left arm, and Luna looked at hers with calm, unsurprised eyes, and on both of their forearms, faint as watermarks, visible only if you knew to look, the same pattern had appeared. Not identical to Harry's. Harmonious with it, the way three notes in a chord are different but make something larger than themselves. The three of them sat in silence for a very long moment. "Well," Luna said finally, in the tone of someone who has found exactly the thing they were looking for, "that explains quite a lot." The library closed at 6. They stayed until Mrs. Alderton gently pointed out that she needed to lock up, by which point they had moved from the floor to the table in the corner, spread several books between them, and established the following: ancient magic was real. It was not the same as the magic referenced in Unexplained Phenomena, a rational inquiry, which Hermione had been working from, or the magic in a compendium of British folklore that Luna had pulled from the oversized reference shelf. Those were downstream of it, the way rivers were downstream of an original watershed. Ancient magic was the thing before the naming of things. The thing that existed before anyone decided to codify it, institutionalize it, teach it in classrooms or regulate it through ministries. What they knew, between them, it was older than recorded wizarding history. It operated by covenant, binding agreements between souls, not between individuals and institutions. It recognized sovereignty. It had been feared by the founders of organized magical society precisely because it could not be administered. What they didn't know, almost everything else. "We need more information," Hermione said, which was her default conclusion in situations of uncertainty. "We need better books," Harry said. "These ones keep going around the subject without saying anything." "They're frightened of it," Luna said. She had been flipping through the folklore compendium with her characteristic unhurried focus. "Look, every time the text gets close to describing it directly, the language goes vague. Certain forces beyond conventional classification. Power whose mechanisms defy systematic study. They know it exists and they don't want to name it because naming it makes it discussable and discussing it is threatening to the people who benefit from the current system." Hermione looked at her with an expression that was clearly a reassessment. Yes, actually. That's exactly it. My father publishes a magazine," Luna said. "He says the same thing happens in journalism. The stories that never get specific are the ones that somebody powerful wants kept general." Harry watched them. In the 2 months he had spent in this corner of this library, he had never sat at the table. He had never spoken to anyone. He had consumed books like they were provisions against something, storing up information and language for a future he couldn't see clearly. He could see it a little more clearly now. "I should tell you both something," he said. They looked at him. "I live with my aunt and uncle. My parents they died when I was a baby. My aunt and uncle tell people it was a car accident." He kept his voice level. He had practiced keeping his voice level. "It wasn't. I don't know what actually happened, but I know it wasn't that." He looked at the mark on his arm. "And I've always known that whatever this is, whatever happens around me sometimes, it's connected to that. To whatever happened to them." He waited for them to look uncomfortable or pitying or to change the subject the way adults did. Hermione said, "What do you know about your parents?" Luna said, "What have you found out on your own?" He looked at them for a moment. Then he reached into his school bag, he always brought it, full of library books, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He had been collecting it for 3 years. Names. Dates. The word magical that he'd seen once in a letter his aunt had been writing and then burned when she realized he'd seen it. The phrase "he who must not be named" overheard through a wall. He spread it on the table. They leaned in. Hermione started cross-referencing immediately, pulling threads from the books around them. Luna read the page slowly and then looked up and said, "Your parents were murdered by someone the wizarding world is afraid to name. And you survived it, which apparently nobody was supposed to do. And now you have a covenant mark." "And now we have covenant marks," Hermione corrected, tapping her own forearm. "Which suggests," Luna said, "that whatever ancient compact chose Harry also chose us. Which is interesting, given the timing." "What do you mean, the timing?" Harry asked. Luna folded her hands on the table with the serenity of someone delivering very large news to someone who is not yet ready for it. "My father has sources in the ministry. He doesn't publish most of what they tell him because it wouldn't be believed, but he tells me things. One of the things he told me is that there are people in power, very old families, certain authority figures, who have a plan. For you, specifically. They've had it since you were a baby." She paused. "They think they know what you are and what you're for. They have decided in advance what your life is supposed to look like." Harry went very still again. It was different from the stillness of before. Before had been the stillness of someone hiding. This was something else. The stillness of something that has stopped moving in order to choose a direction. "That's a remarkably specific thing to know," Hermione said to Luna. "My father is very thorough," Luna said simply. "Who are these people?" Harry asked. "Some of them are in the ministry. Some of them are not officially anywhere but they have influence. There's a specific person, a very old wizard who is considered very wise and very good." She said the words wise and good with the same inflection other people might use for alleged and reportedly. "He has been making arrangements." Hermione picked up her pencil and started writing in the margin of her notebook. Not notes, she was working through something. Harry watched her write and cross out and write again. "If the ancient magic chose us equally," she said, "then whoever has been planning a role for Harry has been planning for a scenario that doesn't actually exist. They think he's alone. They think he's isolated and uninformed and manageable." She looked up. "The moment we walk into whatever world this leads to, we change their calculations. Which means," Harry said slowly, "we should walk in knowing that. We should walk in knowing everything we can," Hermione said. "We have, how long do we have?" "Hogwarts, presumably. Acceptance letters at age 11. She was already tallying something. 2 years. 2 years, Harry agreed. Luna said, "That's enough time." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, Cavendish Street was doing its ordinary Wednesday evening things: cars, a dog barking, the distant sound of someone's television through an open window. The library was quiet around them, and the marks on their arms had faded back to their resting state, barely visible, patient. "We should meet here," Hermione said. "Every Wednesday. More often if we can arrange it. We need to establish what we know and what we need to know and how to find out the difference. We should also write things down," Luna said, "but not in one place. Separately, so that if anyone finds one set of notes they don't have all of it." Harry looked at her. "How old are you?" 9, Luna said. "Same as you. I read a great deal." She paused. "And my mother taught me that information is most powerful when it's distributed rather than held by one person. She said that's why institutions try to centralize it." "I like your mother," Hermione said. "She was extraordinary," Luna said, with the simple directness of someone who has processed grief but not minimized it. "She died 2 years ago. An experiment. Something went wrong." "I'm sorry," Harry said. Luna nodded. She knew the risks. She accepted them. A small, genuine smile. She would have found this, she gestured at the three of them, the table, the marks, the evening gathering outside, very exciting. The lights flickered once, which in a Muggle library meant the building manager was about to tell them it was time to leave. They gathered their things efficiently, the practiced motion of people who do not like to leave evidence behind. At the door, Hermione stopped. "We should be clear about something," she said. She looked at Harry, then Luna, then back to Harry. "Whatever this is, the marks, the covenant, whatever we find in the next 2 years, I want it to be understood that we're approaching it as equals. I'm not following you because you were marked first, and Luna isn't following you because she found you. If we're going to do this, we do it together, with equal say in every decision." "Ancient magic already said that," Luna pointed out. "Ancient magic can say what it likes," Hermione said, "but I want us to say it too. People need to hear things from people, not just from forces." Harry looked at her. He thought about his whole life, about the cupboard under the stairs, about your nothing, boy, about being told to make himself small and invisible and grateful for scraps. He thought about what it felt like when the mark had brightened, that opening door sensation. He thought about Luna saying sovereign with the same matter-of-fact certainty she brought to everything. "Equal," he said. "Completely." "Equal," Luna agreed serenely. "Obviously." Hermione let out a breath that had some relief in it, which was interesting, because she'd been the one proposing it and hadn't seemed uncertain until that moment. Then she straightened up, and something in her posture shifted. She stopped looking like a girl who'd wandered into something unexpected and started looking like someone who had decided to be exactly where she was. "Right," she said. "Wednesday. Same corner. Bring everything you can find." She walked out into the evening. Luna glanced at Harry. "She's going to be extraordinary." "So are you," Harry said. "So are we." It came out without him thinking about it, which was how he knew he meant it. Luna smiled, a real one, the first fully unguarded expression he'd seen from her. Then she tucked her upside-down book under her arm and walked out into the fading July light. Harry stood for a moment in the doorway of the library, his left sleeve still slightly pushed up, the mark on his forearm resting quiet and patient as a sleeping coal. He thought about his parents. He thought about a very old wizard making arrangements. He thought about walking into a world that had already decided what he was supposed to be, with 2 people beside him who had agreed, 3 weeks before they were supposed to, 2 years before anyone expected, on the floor of a Muggle library between the natural history section and the atlases nobody touched, that they were going to be something else entirely. He pulled his sleeve down and walked out into the evening, and for the first time in his memory, he wasn't making himself small. The next 2 years were not quiet. They were not dramatic either, not in the way that made Petunia nervous or gave Vernon ammunition. Harry had spent a long time learning the particular skill of being present without being visible, and he applied it now in a different direction, present, visible, but not interesting to the wrong people. Wednesdays were theirs. Sometimes Saturdays too, when Luna's father brought her to London for his source meetings and left her at the library for the afternoon with a packed lunch and cheerful confidence in her ability to manage herself. Hermione's parents were dentists who worked long hours and loved their daughter fiercely and were increasingly aware that she was operating on intellectual frequencies they couldn't quite tune into. They responded to this by getting her a library card with unlimited holds and trusting her to use it well. They built a reading list, which became a curriculum, which became something more serious than either of those words. Hermione organized it chronologically and thematically. Luna found primary sources in places Hermione wouldn't have thought to look, her father's archive, second-hand bookshops in Diagon Alley that she accessed through a contact her mother had left her, a correspondence she initiated with a retired magical historian in Edinburgh who was delighted by thoughtful questions and didn't ask inconvenient questions about the asker's age. Harry read everything both of them produced and had the unsettling habit of synthesizing it into conclusions neither of them had reached yet. "You do that," Hermione said to him in October of the first year, after he had connected something in a Celtic folklore text to a pattern in the legal history of the International Confederation of Wizards that she had spent 2 weeks building toward. "You skip steps." "I don't skip them," Harry said. "I do them faster." "That's not how." He shrugged, which annoyed her. "I've been thinking about things my whole life with no one to talk to about them. I've had a lot of practice working things out sideways." Luna, who was reading a catalogue of restricted archival holdings upside down for no reason she had explained, said, "It's intuitive rather than sequential reasoning. Both are valid. They cover different ground." Hermione spent a week being slightly irritated about this and then concluded that Luna was right and moved on. What they learned, over those 2 years, built up in layers. There was a wizarding world, parallel to the Muggle one, with its own government and school system and social hierarchy. Hermione had been halfway to this conclusion before the library. She refined it into certainty and then began mapping its power structures the way she mapped everything else, methodically, from the edges in toward the center. The Hogwarts school system favored certain kinds of intelligence and certain kinds of families. It had been designed, in part, to sort people before they knew they were being sorted. The house system was not innocent. The curriculum had gaps that were not accidental. The Ministry of Magic operated by consensus agreement in theory and by the preferences of a relatively small number of old, wealthy families in practice. Several of these families had supported, at various times in the recent past, an entity referred to by most of the wizarding world as you-know-who or he who must not be named. Harry's parents had not died in a car accident. They had been murdered by this entity, who had then attempted to murder Harry, and, for reasons that were the subject of intense academic and political controversy in wizarding circles, had failed. The failure had scattered the entity but not destroyed it. Most people believed it was gone. Several people who knew better were preparing. Albus Dumbledore was the headmaster of Hogwarts, the formerly chief warlock of the Wizengamot, the supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, and by all available evidence the single most influential individual in the wizarding world. He was also, by everything they could piece together, the architect of a plan that centered on Harry returning to that world at age 11, uninformed, isolated, and emotionally positioned to accept guidance. "He's not malicious," Luna said one Wednesday in March, the spring before their Hogwarts letters. She said it the way she said most things, with the certainty of someone reporting observed fact. "He genuinely believes he's protecting people. That's almost more dangerous." "It is more dangerous," Hermione said. "Someone who knows they're doing something wrong can be argued with on moral grounds. Someone who is convinced they're righteous just keeps adjusting the justification." Harry said nothing for a moment. He was looking at the window. Outside, a March rain was doing gray and patient things to the street. "He would have let me grow up in that house," he said. "Knowing what my aunt and uncle were like. He would have let it happen because it served the plan." "Yes," Hermione said. "I'm not angry about it," he said, which surprised her. Then he looked back at them. "I was. For a long time I was very angry. But right now what I mainly feel is clear." He turned his left arm over, though the sleeve was down. He planned for a Harry Potter who didn't know anything and didn't have anyone. We are going to walk in as something completely different, and every plan he has made is going to need to be remade, and there is nothing he can do to stop that. Luna smiled her small, genuine smile. Hermione looked at him with an expression that had some relief in it again, and some admiration, and something that was becoming, over 2 years, the bedrock kind of trust that didn't need to announce itself. "When our letters come," she said, "we respond on the same day. We arrive at Diagon Alley together. We arrive at Hogwarts together. We go through every part of the process side by side." "The sorting is going to be interesting," Luna said. She had found references to the sorting hat in several sources. The hat evaluates character and places you in a house. But it's also, according to one account I found, it responds to the desires of the wearer. "Then we know what we desire," Harry said. Together, Hermione agreed. Together, Luna said. The letters came on a Tuesday, which was not a Wednesday, but Harry went and knocked on Hermione's door anyway, and she opened it with her letter already open in her hand and her eyes doing that bright rapid thing they did when she was working at full speed. Same day, she said. Same day, he agreed. They sent their acceptances that afternoon. That evening, Harry sat in his cupboard, his actual sleeping space, because the Dursleys had not made any adjustments to his living arrangements despite the passage of 2 years and his demonstrated ability to be unobtrusive and useful, and he held his left arm up in the darkness and watched the mark on it pulse slowly, steadily, like a clock that had been keeping time for a very long time and was not in any hurry. He thought about what it meant to have been born with something written on you that the entire established order of the wizarding world would find inconvenient. He thought about 2 girls, one in a house 4 streets away and one in a village past the edge of the city, who had the same thing written on them now. He thought about Dumbledore, old and powerful and certain, looking at the space where a controllable boy was supposed to be standing and finding instead 3 sovereign souls who had spent 2 years getting ready for him. He almost felt sorry for the man. Almost. He pulled his sleeve down, tucked the acceptance letter under his mattress, and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 9 years he dreamed about his parents without the dream turning to fire. On the morning of July 31st, Harry's birthday, which the Dursleys did not observe, 3 things happened simultaneously in 3 different locations. In a cupboard under the stairs on Privet Drive, a boy woke up and felt, for the first time he could name, something that was straightforwardly and uncomplicated excited. In a bedroom above a dental practice in Oxford, a girl sat up at dawn with a notebook already in her hand, because she had been lying awake for an hour working through contingencies and had finally decided to write them down. In a cottage past the edge of a village, a girl stepped out into an overgrown garden in her nightgown, turned her face up to the early morning sky, and smiled at something only she could see. The marks on all 3 of their left forearms brightened once, not in alarm, not in warning. In recognition. The way 3 people in a crowded room might catch each other's eyes across the distance. "We are here," the mark said, in the language that was older than language. "We know," said the 3 of them, in their different ways, in their different places, to the same thing. The summer was almost over. Everything was about to begin. Chapter 2, The world that was waiting. Diagon Alley smelled like candle wax, old leather, and something else that Harry could only describe as charged. The air had a weight to it, a faint pressure behind the ears, like the moment before a storm decides what it's going to do. He'd been told about it by Luna, who had been brought here several times by her father. She described it in her particular way. It smells like potential, but also like arguments about potential, and he'd filed that away and moved on to the practical questions. Hermione had made a list. The list was 2 pages, front and back, organized by priority and annotated with estimated costs cross-referenced against the school supply letter. They arrived together. That had been the plan, and it had been achieved with the minor logistical miracle of Hermione's parents agreeing to collect Harry from Privet Drive at 8:30, Hermione introducing Harry to her parents in the car with the smooth competence of someone who had already briefed them, and her parents, kind, sensible people who were clearly accustomed to their daughter operating with organized intent, asking no difficult questions. Luna met them at the entrance to the Leaky Cauldron. She was wearing a yellow dress and the mismatched earrings she'd been wearing the day they met, which Harry suspected was deliberate. Her father Xenophilius was a tall, vague-looking man with the same silver-pale eyes as his daughter, who shook hands with Hermione's parents and said something about the favorable alignment of Nargles in late August that Mr. and Mrs. Granger received with the polite neutrality of people who had decided to reserve judgment. "Ready?" Luna said to Harry. "Been ready," he said. She smiled, and they walked into the Leaky Cauldron. The wizarding world hit Harry all at once, not as a shock, because he'd been preparing for it, but as a confirmation. 2 years of reading about something and then standing in it were different experiences. The Leaky Cauldron was dim and busy and smelled of butterbeer and something herby burning in a grate, and the people in it were dressed in robes and pointed hats and had the comfortable ease of people who had never had to pretend this wasn't their world. Harry walked through without slowing down. Tom the barman looked up as they passed, and his eyes went to Harry's scar with the reflexive pull of someone who can't help it, and Harry met his gaze with the polite neutrality of someone who had been doing this his whole life and had run completely out of apologies for existing. Tom blinked and looked away first. Hermione had noticed. She filed it and said nothing. The tap sequence that opened the alley was something Luna had described in detail, 3 up, 2 across. Hermione had memorized it, and the wall opened in its tumbling brick sequence, and they walked through into the noise and color of Diagon Alley proper, and the thing Harry felt was not wonder, which was what you were apparently supposed to feel. It was recognition. Like finding, at last, the map for a country you'd been living in without one. Gringotts first, Hermione said. She had the school letter in her hand, not because she needed to consult it, but because she was the kind of person who held plans in a tangible form. Then flourish and blots, Luna said. I want to see what the current curriculum texts look like. Robe fitting will take the longest, Harry said. Let's do that second to last and Ollivander's last. They moved through the alley with the purpose of people who have an agenda, which meant that half the things that might have distracted wide-eyed 11-year-olds simply bounced off them. The Quidditch supply shop. The magical menagerie. The joke shop with its smell of sulfur and burnt sugar. Harry noted all of it, stored it, kept moving. Gringotts was marble and chandelier and the subtle threat of goblins who would clearly prefer not to be here any more than anyone deserved them to be. The goblin at the front desk looked at Harry with yellow eyes and considerably more attention than Tom the barman had managed. Mr. Potter, the goblin said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Harry said. You have accounts. I'd like to access them. He paused. And I'd like to know their full status. Not just the trust vault, all of them. A beat. The goblin's yellow eyes sharpened, which Harry took as interest rather than hostility. Not many come asking for a full accounting on their first visit. I've been waiting to ask for a long time, Harry said. The goblin almost smiled. It was the kind of almost smile that acknowledged a statement worth acknowledging. Follow me. Hermione stayed close to Harry while the goblin, Griphook, it turned out, led them through the banking procedures. Luna drifted slightly, looking at the architecture with the kind of interest that seemed unfocused but probably wasn't. Hermione had her notebook out and was writing down figures as Griphook read them. The Potter accounts were not small. Harry had understood, in the abstract, that his family had money. What he had not understood was the scale of it. The trust vault was for school expenses, yes, but beneath it were investment holdings, property records, a vault labeled Potter Family Archive that Griphook said had not been touched in 10 years, and a series of sealed accounts that required a majority of age review or a specific unlocking condition. What's the unlocking condition on these? Hermione asked, pointing to 3 accounts listed as dormant, condition pending. Griphook looked at her with the focused attention he'd been giving Harry. That information is attached to the account holder's magical status documentation. It reviews at majority or at covenant activation. Harry and Hermione and Luna all looked at each other. Covenant activation, Harry said. What does that mean, precisely, in the context of Gringotts records? Griphook's yellow eyes went to Harry's left arm, where the sleeve covered the mark, and then back to his face. The goblin's expression did something complicated that Harry couldn't quite read. There are, Griphook said carefully, old compacts. Older than the Ministry's record-keeping. Gringotts maintains certain records that the Ministry does not. A pause. If a covenant brand has been confirmed, the holder would need to present for verification. All 3 holders. What if there are more accounts associated with the other holders? Hermione said. If the compact is of sufficient age and standing, there would be. Griphook looked between the 3 of them with the deliberate assessment of someone who has just recalibrated their understanding of a situation. The Vault Processing Office can arrange a verification appointment. It is not a standard service. We'd like one, Luna said, from behind them, where she'd been looking at a tapestry on the wall. Her voice was perfectly calm. As soon as is convenient. Griphook made a sound that was nearly a laugh. Then he began filling out forms, which was, Harry thought, the most encouraging thing that had happened so far. They emerged from Gringotts 2 hours later than planned, each carrying a small, heavy pouch, with an appointment card in Harry's pocket for a covenant verification session on September 15th, the earliest available after their arrival at Hogwarts. Hermione had 3 pages of notes. Luna had asked Griphook a question about goblin accounting practices as they left that had clearly pleased him, which Harry filed as a thing to think about later. The alley had gotten busier. Late August was peak shopping season for Hogwarts families, and the crowd had that particular texture of parents trying to be efficient and children wanting to look at everything. Harry moved through it with the ease of someone who had learned early to navigate crowds without drawing attention, and then immediately became the center of attention anyway. It happened twice. The first time was in Madame Malkin's robe shop, where a round-faced woman fitting Harry's school robes said "oh" in a soft, startled way and then recovered herself and didn't say anything else. The second time was outside Flourish and Blots, where a man in formal robes stopped dead on the pavement, stared at Harry's forehead, went slightly gray, and then swept off without a word. "It's going to be like this all year," Hermione said, not looking up from the curriculum book she'd opened on the street, because Hermione Granger had absolutely no concerns about reading while standing on a public pavement. "People looking at you. Some of them will cry." "I know," Harry said. "It's going to be irritating. Incredibly. You're going to be patient about it anyway, because being irritated by it publicly gives them a narrative." "I know that too." He looked at her sidelong. "Did you sleep last night?" "A little. I was thinking about the defense curriculum." She turned a page. "It's appalling. 3 years of theoretical defensive magic before they introduce any practical application. That's deliberate. That's not curriculum design, that's crowd control. Limit what they can do until they're old enough to be convinced to limit themselves," Luna said. She was eating something from a paper bag that she had acquired at some point without either of them noticing. By the time they get to practical application, most students have already internalized the idea that magic is something that happens within boundaries. "We're going to be ahead of the curriculum," Harry said. "We're going to be embarrassingly ahead of the curriculum," Hermione said, which should have sounded arrogant but came out as a simple statement of logistics. "Which creates a question. We can hide it or we cannot hide it." Harry said, "Not hiding it." "Obviously," Luna agreed. Hermione looked at him with a slight smile. "I wanted to make sure we agreed." They found Ollivander's last, as planned. The shop was narrow and had the particular silence of a place that was paying attention to you, and Mr. Ollivander himself emerged from behind a shelf with the silent inevitability of a man who has been waiting for a customer and knows something about the customer already. He looked at Harry, and his silver eyes went soft with something that was not quite surprise. "Mr. Potter," he said. Then, distinctly, "At last." "That happens a lot," Harry said. "I imagine it will continue to. I knew your parents. Your mother's wand was willow, 10 1/4, excellent for charms. Your father, mahogany, pliable, 11 inches. He tilted his head. "Every wand I have ever sold is logged in my memory. The wand that did, what was done to your parents," he stopped. "That wand I know as well. Better, perhaps, than I would like." "You made Voldemort's wand," Harry said. He said the name without hesitation, without the flinch that Ollivander visibly expected, and the wandmaker's eyes sharpened. "You, 13 1/2 inches, phoenix feather core. And yours," he moved to his shelves with swift, bird-like efficiency. "Let me see. Let me see." The process was methodical and strange and produced 3 wands in the box simultaneously when Ollivander tried a fourth option, holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather, and it lit up in Harry's hand like a lamp coming on, and at the exact same moment the marks on all three of their left forearms pulsed warm through their sleeves, and Ollivander went very, very still. "Curious," he said. He looked at all three of them. The calculation running behind his eyes was visible in the way a deep river is visible. You can't see the bottom, but you know the current is moving. Very curious indeed. He looked at Harry's left arm. Not the right. The left. "May I ask?" "No. No, I don't think I will ask. But I will say this, in 90-odd years of wand-making, I have given a phoenix feather core to exactly 2 wands. Yours is one. The other you already know." "Brother wands," Hermione said. "Connected," Ollivander agreed. "Which is significant in ways that go beyond the technical." He looked at all three of them again with those ancient silver eyes. "You are not what was expected." "No," Harry agreed pleasantly. "We're not." Luna's wand was 9.5 inches, fir wood with a thestral tail hair core, which Ollivander located after an extended search that seemed to genuinely excite him, and when she held it the air in the shop did something that wasn't quite a temperature change but felt like one. Like something vast had shifted its attention. Hermione's wand was 10.75 inches, vine wood, dragon heartstring. The moment it worked, the shop's stacked boxes rattled faintly on their shelves. 3 very different wands, Ollivander said, after he'd boxed all 3 and taken payment. He had the tone of someone narrating to himself. 3 very distinct magical signatures. And yet? Hermione prompted. "And yet when all 3 are active in proximity, the resonance pattern is, I've read about it. I didn't expect to see it." He looked at them with what Harry thought might be the closest Ollivander came to unguarded feeling. Take care of each other. It wasn't good luck. It wasn't be careful. It was something more specific than either. "We intend to," Luna said. September 1st arrived with the organized chaos of King's Cross Station and the particular quality of noise that large crowds in transit produce, overlapping announcements, rolling luggage, pigeons, a child crying somewhere behind a pillar. Harry had been here, in the Muggle portion, a dozen times. The magical portion was, according to Luna, accessible through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. He walked through the barrier without breaking stride and felt it, the same charged pressure as Diagon Alley, amplified, and on the other side, platform 9.75 existed in its own particular reality. The Hogwarts Express was red and steam-breathing and genuinely magnificent, Harry admitted privately. Some things deserve to be admired. Hermione came through the barrier with her parents 30 seconds behind him, and her mother hugged her and her father shook Harry's hand with the warmth of someone who has decided you're trustworthy and means it, and then her parents were gone back through the barrier with the slightly stunned expressions of Muggle parents who have been delivering their child to a magical train station and have not entirely processed this. Luna was already on the platform, Xenophilius beside her, talking with the focused excitement of a journalist who has just spotted something worth noting. He waved at Harry and Hermione with the casual warmth of someone who already considers them family, which, Harry thought, they perhaps already were, in the way that mattered. They found a compartment and filled it with their luggage and each other, and the train began to move with a long, satisfied exhalation of steam. For a while they just let the countryside happen outside the window. England doing its late summer green and brown patchwork, the city falling behind them, the air in the compartment settling into the specific quality of a space occupied by people who are comfortable being quiet together. "We should talk about the sorting," Hermione said eventually. "Gryffindor," Harry said. "Gryffindor," she agreed. They both looked at Luna. Luna was looking out the window. "I've been thinking about that," she said. "My family has been Ravenclaw for 6 generations. And?" Harry said. "And I think the hat will tell me Ravenclaw, because that's where my qualities map most neatly by the criteria the hat uses." She turned from the window. "But the criteria the hat uses are not the only criteria. And I'm not my family. I'm me. What do you want?" Hermione asked. I want to be where you are, Luna said, with the simplicity that she brought to everything important. Not because I need to be. Because we function better together than apart, and we know things are coming, and I'm not interested in spending the next 7 years sleeping in a different tower because of a hat-sorting algorithm. Harry looked at her. The hat is supposed to respond to what you want. I know. A small smile. I've been practicing wanting very clearly. The trolley came and went. They ate chocolate frogs and every flavor beans with the selective caution of people who read the product information, and Hermione identified 3 chocolate frog cards she hadn't seen before and catalogued them without being asked. Luna fed a corner of her pumpkin pasty to a small thing that might have been a flobberworm or a very relaxed caterpillar that she'd apparently been carrying in her pocket. The compartment door opened twice. First time, a boy with red hair and freckles and a slightly lost expression, looking for a seat, who introduced himself as Ron Weasley and stayed for 20 minutes and was pleasant enough, though Harry noticed him look at the scar with the same reflexive pull as Tom the barman. The second time, a boy with white blonde hair and a carried sense of importance, who introduced himself as Malfoy without the first name as though the surname were title enough, and who looked around the compartment with the assessment of someone calculating social value. His gaze landed on Harry and brightened with the particular shine of someone who thinks they're about to make a good connection. You're Potter. Harry, he said. Malfoy either didn't notice the distinction or chose not to. Draco Malfoy. He let a beat pass, as though waiting for recognition, then moved on without letting the lack of it show. You'll want to be careful about who you associate with. Some families, his gaze went briefly to Ron Weasley, are better than others. I'll keep that in mind, Harry said, in the tone of someone who has already made up their mind. The best families will be in Slytherin. You'll find that's where the serious people end up. Hermione looked up from her book. Is that the conclusion you've drawn from research, or from having been told so by people invested in the conclusion? Malfoy looked at her. There was a beat where he processed the question and didn't have an answer for it, which Harry could see annoyed him significantly. And you are? Hermione Granger. She returned to her book. Malfoy left. Ron Weasley had watched this whole exchange and was now looking at Hermione with an expression that Harry recognized as someone encountering, for the first time, a person who fights with facts rather than volume. Blimey, Ron said. He'll be in Slytherin, Luna said from the window. And he'll be difficult. But he's not the most dangerous thing about this year. Ron looked at her. What's the most dangerous thing about this year? Luna smiled pleasantly. The things that are already inside the castle. Ron, wisely, did not ask her to elaborate. Hogwarts from across the lake was, Harry admitted this fully and without reservation, extraordinary. It rose against the night sky with the weight of centuries behind it, towers and battlements and lit windows and the suggestion of something vast and alive beneath the stone, and he felt the same recognition he'd felt in Diagon Alley but deeper this time, like finding the original map and not just a copy. The boats. The lake. The squid, briefly visible as a disturbance in dark water. The castle gates and the entrance hall, all flagstone and torchlight and 140 students trying to decide how frightened to be. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall with the brisk authority of someone who has been managing 11-year-olds for decades and has long since run out of patience for theater about it. She was exactly as Harry had pictured her from everything they'd read, precise and unsentimental, with the kind of intelligence that expressed itself through competence rather than performance. Her eyes went to Harry with the same reflexive pull as everyone else's, and then she caught herself with more composure than most, and moved efficiently to her welcome speech. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Luna. Luna looked at the enchanted ceiling of the entrance hall, which showed clouds moving over stars, and smiled. The sorting was held under the eyes of all 4 house tables and the entire staff. The hat sat on its stool like a battered, patient oracle, and it sang its sorting song, a history of the houses, a description of the qualities that went into each, and Harry listened and noticed 2 things. First, that the song managed to describe complementary virtues as competing categories, which was a good description of how most systems of control operated, and second, that Dumbledore, at the staff table, was watching the assembled first years with the careful attention of a man looking for something specific. Harry looked at him directly, which Dumbledore would not expect. For a fraction of a second, the headmaster's gaze found his, and something moved through the old man's expression, not guilt, exactly. Recalibration. Harry held it for a moment, easy and steady, and then looked away. Several students were sorted. Some relieved, some disappointed, all of them stepping off the stool looking slightly processed. Granger, Hermione. She sat on the stool with her back straight and placed the hat on her head, and the hat was still for approximately 4 seconds, which Harry would later learn was nearly record-breaking brevity, and said, "Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table applauded. Hermione walked to it, sat down, and turned immediately to watch the rest of the sorting with focused attention, which was so precisely Hermione that Harry almost laughed. "Lovegood, Luna." Luna drifted to the stool in her characteristic way, sat down, placed the hat on her head, and the hat went quiet. 5 seconds. 7. 9. At about the 12-second mark, the hat made a sound that might have been surprise, and then, Gryffindor. There was a murmur through the hall. A Lovegood in Gryffindor was presumably noteworthy for those who knew the family history. Luna walked to the table with her chin slightly up and sat beside Hermione without acknowledging the murmur at all. "Potter, Harry." The hall went quieter than it had been for anyone else. The particular silence of several hundred people holding their collective breath. Harry walked to the stool, sat down, placed the hat on his head. The hat touched his mind with the courteous efficiency of something that has done this 10,000 times, and then stopped. Harry felt the pause stretch differently than it had stretched for the others. The hat was very old. He could feel the age of it, not as a texture, but as depth, like standing at the edge of something that went down further than you could see. Interesting, the hat said inside his head. Not via sound, it was more like thought, but shaped differently than his own. Very interesting. A long time since I've seen, well. Never this, precisely. The question is where. You know where, Harry said back, inside his own head. Do I? You felt the others. You felt what's between us. He kept it level, even, the way he'd kept everything level for 2 years. And you respond to what we want. We've been very clear about what we want. A pause that felt genuinely contemplative. You know about that. We researched. Most students don't research the sorting hat. Most students spend the 2 years before Hogwarts doing other things. Another pause. Then the hat said, with something that wasn't quite amusement but was adjacent to it, "You'd do well anywhere. You know that. Every house would benefit from you. But you're not asking me where you'd do well." "No," Harry agreed. "I'm asking you to acknowledge what you already know." What followed was a silence that lasted, the hall thought, approximately 15 seconds, which made it the longest sorting of the evening. Harry sat on the stool with his hands loose in his lap and waited, patient as the mark on his arm had always been patient. "Gryffindor," the hat announced. The hall exploded. Not just the Gryffindor table, all of them, the cumulative pressure of a held breath releasing, a sound that moved through the ancient rafters and probably disturbed every ghost in the building. Harry removed the hat, set it back on the stool with care, and walked to the Gryffindor table without hurrying, and sat between Hermione and Luna with the ease of someone completing a thing that was always going to happen. Dumbledore, at the staff table, was watching him with the careful expression of a man revising his estimates. Harry looked up, caught the headmaster's eye across the hall, and gave him the same pleasant, level look he'd given Malfoy on the train. Then he picked up his fork, because the food had appeared, and he was genuinely very hungry. "Well done," Luna said quietly, reaching for the potatoes. "Same to you," Harry said. "Both of you." The hat argued with me for at least 6 seconds, Hermione said, with the tone of someone who takes being argued with as a point of pride. It asked me if I was certain, Luna said. Twice. I said yes, twice. It seemed satisfied by the consistency. Harry looked at the staff table. Dumbledore was speaking to Professor McGonagall, who had glanced at Harry with an expression that was difficult to read. Professor Quirrell, the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, was looking at his plate with the concentrated attention of someone using it to avoid looking anywhere else. There was something wrong with Quirrell. Harry had felt it the moment he'd entered the hall, a disruption in the charged air, like a note played out of tune. He filed it. Quirrell, he said quietly. Yes, Hermione said, equally quiet. She'd noticed. Something's not right with him, Luna said. He smells wrong. Not literally, it's a feeling. Like standing next to something that is trying to present as one thing but is actually another. Ron Weasley, on Harry's other side, was working through a leg of chicken and looked over with what Harry was beginning to recognize as his default expression, interested and slightly alarmed. You three are very intense, you know. We're curious, Luna said. It looks like intense from the outside. Most curiosity does, she said pleasantly, and offered him the potatoes. The dormitories were stone and firelight and the smell of wood smoke and something like cedar, and Harry stood at the window of the boys' first-year room and looked out at the castle grounds, the lake a dark mirror under stars, the forbidden forest a suggestion of shadow at the edge of the grounds, and felt the castle around him. Felt it genuinely. Not metaphorically. The mark on his arm was warm in a way it got sometimes, not the heat of urgency, but something more like resonance, like a bell that has been struck and is still vibrating long after the initial impact. The castle had magic in its walls the way a person has blood, not separate from the structure but part of it, fundamental. And the castle knew him. That was the strange part. Or not strange, exactly, but significant. Like arriving somewhere you've never been and finding that your name is already on a door. He pressed his hand flat to the stone of the windowsill and the warmth went both directions, and he thought, I'm here. The castle said nothing back in words. But the torches in the corridor outside flickered, once, warm and brief, like an acknowledgement. He heard Hermione's voice from one floor down. She had the window of the girls' dorm, he knew from the layout he'd memorized, and couldn't make out the words but could hear the tone, which was focused and slightly impatient, which meant she was already thinking about tomorrow's schedule. And from further away, so faint it might have been the wind but wasn't, Luna, singing something soft and tuneless that was probably not in any language Harry knew but that settled into the room like it belonged there. He turned from the window and sat on his bed, an actual bed, curtained and pillowed, the size of something he'd never had, and looked at his left arm in the near dark. The mark was visible tonight without effort, the interlocking pattern moving gently like water. Tomorrow the classes started. Tomorrow Dumbledore's plan encountered the reality they had spent 2 years building. Tomorrow the question of what they actually were, what 3 sovereign souls of ancient magic covenant actually meant in practice, in the corridors of a school, in a world that had already written their story, would begin to be answered. He wasn't nervous. He was, he thought, exactly what he'd told Hermione he felt on the train platform, clear. And he was certain, exactly where he was supposed to be, not because someone had put him here, but because he had chosen it, with full knowledge, in the company of people who had made the same choice. The castle settled around him. Old stones doing what old stones do, breathing slow and steady through centuries. Harry Potter closed his eyes, and slept. Chapter 3, What Lives in the Dark. The thing about being ahead of the curriculum was that it became obvious immediately and stayed obvious in ways that were sometimes useful and sometimes exhausting. Charms on Monday was Professor Flitwick, who was small and precise and genuinely enthusiastic about magic in the way of someone who has never stopped finding it remarkable. When he asked the class to identify the 3 primary wand movement classifications for incantation-paired spell work, Hermione answered before he'd finished the question, correctly and in more detail than the question required, and Flitwick's face lit up like a man who has been given an unexpected gift. He asked a follow-up question. She answered that too. He asked a third, which was more advanced, and she paused, not because she didn't know, but because she was deciding how much to reveal, and then answered it fully, and Flitwick looked at her with pure academic delight. Harry watched this and was glad Hermione was the one who'd gone first, because it established a context. When Flitwick asked a question of the class generally and Harry answered it from the back of the room with equal precision, it landed differently than it would have if he'd been first. Not a spotlight. A pattern. Luna answered one question, late in the lesson, about the theoretical limits of charm persistence on transfigured objects. Her answer was technically correct and included a reference to research from a Bulgarian magical institute that Flitwick had clearly not encountered, and the tiny professor spent the rest of the lesson looking at her with the expression of someone who has just found a very interesting problem. After class, walking through the corridor toward Transfiguration, Ron Weasley appeared at Harry's shoulder with the slight breathlessness of someone who has been moving quickly to catch up. "Does that happen in every class?" he asked. "Probably," Harry said. Hermione answered 7 questions. 8. The last one was a 2-part question. Ron absorbed this. He had, over the first 2 days, established himself as someone who was not particularly organized but was genuinely observant, which Harry found more interesting than academic polish. "How do you all know so much already? Did you go to a magical primary school or something?" "Libraries," Harry said. "And 2 years of work." "2 years?" Ron looked at him. "You knew you were magical for 2 years before Hogwarts?" 3 of us did." Ron went quiet for a moment. Harry waited, because Ron's quiet was not the same as him being done, it was processing quiet, the kind that came before an opinion. "Must be strange," Ron said finally, knowing that long and not being able to tell anyone. "We told each other," Harry said. Ron nodded, slowly, like that was an answer to something larger than the question he'd asked. "Right. Yeah." He pushed his robes up his arms in a gesture that Harry would come to recognize as Ron settling himself into a decision. "I'm going to fail Transfiguration, by the way. I just want to put that on record early." "You won't," Harry said. "My brothers all struggled with it." "You're not your brothers." Ron looked at him sideways. Then he grinned, quick and genuine, and Harry thought, there it is. The thing under the slightly lost expression. Something warm and stubborn that had probably been waiting for permission. "Right," Ron said again, differently this time. Transfiguration was McGonagall, and McGonagall was everything her reputation had suggested, rigorously demanding, zero tolerance for performance, and brilliant in the specific way of people who have mastered something so completely that they've come out the other side into simplicity. She turned her desk into a pig and back before anyone had properly sat down, and the room went appropriately odd. She then assigned theoretical reading and set them to practicing the match-to-needle transfiguration with the kind of no-nonsense expectation that said I will be checking, and I will know if you haven't tried. The match-to-needle was, in theory, a straightforward first exercise in form alteration. In practice, it required a precise convergence of visualization, wand movement, and what the textbooks called magical intent, a term that Harry had always found frustratingly vague. He'd been doing intent-driven magic since he was 6. He just hadn't had language for it until Hermione found the right texts. He turned his match to a needle on the 4th attempt, which in the context of a first transfiguration lesson was fast. It wasn't the fastest. Hermione had done it on her 2nd attempt, and McGonagall had nodded at her with the crisp acknowledgement of someone who recognizes genuine competence and isn't going to make a performance of it. Luna turned hers into a needle that was very slightly translucent, which was technically not the correct result and was also not an error, it was a needle, just made of something that wasn't quite metal. McGonagall examined it with her reading glasses on and then straightened up and said, "Miss Lovegood, that's an unusual application of the base transfiguration. The material conversion is substantially more advanced than the form conversion required for this exercise. Can you explain your process?" I wasn't thinking about the shape, Luna said. I was thinking about what a needle is for. It threads things together. So I thought about the quality of that more than the form of it. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. That is a description of purpose-driven transfiguration that is not in your textbook, Miss Lovegood, because it is not typically introduced until 5th year. She set the needle down carefully. I'd like to speak with you after class. Luna smiled and returned to her match. The conversation McGonagall had with Luna after class lasted 20 minutes and set a pattern for the rest of the year, teachers finding that these 3 first years were not ahead of the curriculum in the way of students who had been pushed by ambitious parents, but in the way of students who had developed independently and were therefore coming at everything from unexpected angles. They weren't performing above their level. They were operating on their own level, which was different. Professor Quirrell's defense against the dark arts class was the exception. Quirrell was bad at his job. Not concealed competence bad, not performance anxiety bad. Bad, in the specific way of someone who is not actually engaging with what they're teaching because they are occupied with something else entirely. His lessons were theory only, read almost directly from the textbook, with a nervous energy behind his eyes that Harry had felt from across the Great Hall on the first night and felt more clearly now, close up. There was something living behind Quirrell's stammer and his nervous hat adjustments. Something that recognized Harry the way a locked door recognizes a key, with resistance rather than welcome. Harry took careful notes in defense and said very little. He's frightened, Hermione said that evening, in the Gryffindor common room, her voice low enough that it stayed between the 3 of them. They'd claimed a corner by the window that had become, within 3 days, understood by the other first years as their space. Not through any declaration, just through the consistent, unhurried presence of 3 people who were clearly in the middle of a conversation that had been running for years. Frightened of us? Harry asked. Of being noticed, Luna said. She was mending one of her mismatched earrings with a small pair of pliers she'd produced from her bag. There's something he doesn't want anyone to look at directly. The nervousness is, it's not his. Or not only his. It's layered. Harry considered this. The stone, he said. Both of them looked at him. There's something in this school that shouldn't be here. Something old and powerful and hidden. I've felt it since we arrived, under everything, like a bass note. He pressed his palm flat to the table, which was a habit he'd developed, checking the castle's current through solid surfaces. It's being guarded. 3rd floor corridor, Professor McGonagall said it herself in the welcome rules, don't go there unless you want to die. He paused. That's not a standard school regulation. Philosopher's Stone, Hermione said. She said it the way she said things she'd been holding, waiting for the right moment. I've been building toward this. There was a vault robbery at Gringotts in late July. I found it in an old copy of the Daily Prophet in the library. Vault 713. The article was very careful not to say what had been stored there, which means someone was careful to make it not say that. But the timeline fits, the robbery happened and then whatever was in the vault was moved here. To the safest place in Britain. She paused. Dumbledore moved it. So Dumbledore has an extremely valuable magical artifact hidden in the school, guarded by what is apparently a series of magical obstacles, and the defense against the dark arts teacher has something else living in him that wants access to it, Harry said. When you say it like that, Hermione said, it's quite alarming. It is quite alarming, Luna agreed. She had finished the earring and put it back on. But knowing it means we're not walking into it blind. Which changes things significantly. The fire popped in the grate. Across the common room, Ron Weasley was losing a chess game to himself, which was apparently a regular occurrence. We're not going after the stone, Hermione said, with the firmness of someone preempting an argument. There's a much larger picture here and inserting ourselves into it prematurely is exactly the kind of mistake that gives Dumbledore a narrative to manage. Agreed, Harry said. We watch. We learn the obstacles. We track Quirrell. And we don't move until we understand what's actually happening. Luna said, but we prepare to move. Absolutely, Hermione said. Harry looked at his friends across the table in the warm, firelit common room, surrounded by the hum of a castle that knew his name, and thought about the man at the staff table who had spent years arranging a situation that no longer existed. He almost felt sorry for Dumbledore again. He was getting better at not feeling sorry. October arrived with rain and the smell of cold stone and the mounting horror of Halloween, which in the wizarding world was apparently a major event involving floating candles and the historical memory of some very bad things. Harry didn't mind Halloween particularly. It was the feast that ended the day that mattered. What mattered was what happened during it. Quirrell came into the great hall during the feast, the doors crashing open, the man stumbling with his hand pressed to the turban on his head, the stammer worse than usual and the fear in his eyes completely real now, unguarded. "Troll," he said. "In the dungeons." And then he fainted, which might have been genuine or might have been strategic and Harry had no way to tell which. The hall erupted into noise. Dumbledore's silence cut through it like a conductor's baton. Prefects were directing students back to dormitories and Harry was moving through the crowd in the opposite direction before Hermione had fully processed the situation, because he had already thought through what happened next. The troll was not in the dungeons by accident, which meant it was a distraction, which meant something was happening somewhere else in the castle simultaneously, and also Luna was not beside him. She had been at his left 2 seconds ago. He stopped. He turned. He looked. Luna was 20 feet back, very still in the moving crowd, her head tilted at the ceiling. Following her gaze, Harry saw nothing, and then saw that she wasn't looking at the ceiling, she was listening to something through it, the way she sometimes listened to things that weren't quite sounds. He reached her in 4 steps. "Luna. The troll isn't going to the dungeons," she said. "It's going up. Northwest Tower corridor." She looked at him. "I think someone directed it." It was let in, not wandered in. Harry felt the mark on his arm shift into the heat of urgency. Hermione. Hermione, who had materialized at his other shoulder with the punctuality of someone who had seen him stop and corrected course immediately, said, "I know. The girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor, there's a first-year Hufflepuff girl, I saw her leave the feast early, she'd been crying, they were already moving." The corridor was dark above the 2nd floor, the torches dimmer than usual, which Harry noted as deliberate. Someone had planned this carefully or someone had made this worse by accident, and either way the darkness was a problem. He lit his wand, Lumos, the first-year lesson, and the light that came from his wand was stronger than it should have been for a first year, stronger than it had been in Flitwick's class, warm and steady and enough. Hermione's light came on alongside his. Then Luna's, slightly cooler toned, casting the shadows differently. They heard the troll before they saw it. Mountain trolls were, according to everything Harry had read about them, approximately 12 feet tall and smelled of very old garbage and moved with the heavy displacement of something that has never had a reason to be quiet. The girls' bathroom door was ajar. Through it, the troll, and a tiny Hufflepuff girl, Susan Bones, Harry would learn, pressed into the corner between 2 sinks with her hands over her mouth and her eyes very wide. "Okay," Hermione said quickly, her voice completely level, which was one of the things Harry genuinely respected about her. "The troll's primary weakness is its intelligence, they're very bad at tracking multiple threats. We need to divide its attention." "I'll get her out," Luna said. "I'm the fastest and the smallest and it'll have the hardest time following something that moves low." She looked at Harry and Hermione. "Give me 10 seconds. "We'll give you 15, Harry said. Luna walked through the bathroom door with the untroubled directness of someone entering a room that contains only ordinary furniture, and Harry and Hermione moved to opposite sides of the doorframe. The troll swung toward the movement, toward Luna, and Hermione hit it with a Wingardium Leviosa aimed at the club it was dragging, which lifted the weapon 12 feet into the air, and the troll's attention went upward, confused, and in that moment Luna crossed the room in 4 quick steps, took the Hufflepuff girl's hand, and had her at the door in 8 seconds. The club came back down when Hermione lost focus because the troll was lunging, and Harry, the mark on his arm blazing now, the familiar not quite heat of power moving through him, did not reach for a specific spell because he had learned, over 11 years, that the moments when things went wrong weren't always best addressed by reaching for the first tool at hand. He reached for intent instead. What he wanted was clear, not this, the same refusal that had moved through him his whole life, but now it had language and direction and 3 years of understanding behind it, and when it moved through him and out through the wand it was not a charm from the first-year curriculum. The troll hit the wall. Not violently. With controlled, deliberate force, as though picked up by something calm and set down firmly. It slid down the wall and sat at its base, breathing heavily, one hand pressed to its head with the stunned expression of something that has encountered a force it doesn't have a category for. The bathroom was very quiet. Susan Bones, the Hufflepuff girl, stared at Harry with eyes that were still wide but now for a different reason. "Are you all right?" he said to her. She nodded. Then she nodded again. Then she looked at the troll, which was still sitting against the wall, and looked at Harry again, and said, "What did you do?" "I asked it to stop," Harry said, which wasn't quite accurate but was the best description he had. Hermione was looking at him. She had the expression she got when her calculations and reality were producing different results, not distressed, but recalibrating fast. "Harry." "I know," he said. "That was not first-year magic." "I know. You didn't use a named spell." "I know, Hermione." Luna was watching him with her calm silver eyes and said nothing, which meant she'd already incorporated this into her model of things and was waiting for him to catch up. The sound of running footsteps from the corridor announced the arrival of teachers, McGonagall, Snape, Quirrell, and Harry had approximately 2 seconds to decide how to present what had happened. He decided on the truth, which was his default. "Troll," he said, when McGonagall came through the door. "We found it here. Susan Bones was trapped. We performed the best spells we knew how to perform." McGonagall looked at the troll, which was still sitting against the wall looking dazed, and looked at 3 first-years with lit wands and remarkably steady expressions, and then she looked at Harry with eyes that were sharper than he'd expected. "That troll weighs approximately 200 stone, Mr. Potter," she said. "Did one of you cast a containment charm?" "We used what we had available," Hermione said, very precisely. McGonagall held Harry's gaze for a long moment. Behind her, Quirrell was looking at the troll and then at Harry, and the thing behind his eyes had dropped its pretense entirely for just a moment, not fear, not curiosity. Something much older and colder than either, assessing. Harry looked back at Quirrell with the same pleasant, level regard he'd given Dumbledore on the first night. Quirrell looked away first. Again. 10 points each to Gryffindor, McGonagall said finally, for presence of mind in a dangerous situation. "Do not be in the corridors again without a teacher." She said it as a formal reprimand in a tone that conveyed something else, and Harry heard both. "Absolutely, Professor," he said. The weeks between Halloween and Christmas had the texture of water finding its level, the castle establishing its patterns around the 3 of them, the year getting a sense of what it was going to be. Classes settled into their rhythms. Hermione was, by common consensus of all teaching staff, the most academically formidable student in her year and possibly in several years. She received this with the composed pleasure of someone who has worked very hard and sees no reason to apologize for the results. Harry found himself most interested in charms and defense, though defense under Quirrell was increasingly more about what he was observing than what he was being taught. Luna continued to produce results in every subject that were technically correct and slightly uncanny, and had developed a following among the more intellectually adventurous teachers who appreciated being surprised. Snape was a problem of a different kind. His potion lessons were precisely as hostile as everything Harry had read about them. The snap of attention on the first day, "Potter. Our new celebrity. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry had answered it. Completely and correctly, including the alternative preparation method that produced a longer-acting variation, which he'd found in an advanced potions text the previous spring. The silence that followed had a texture. Snape looked at him with eyes that were doing something complicated, not the pure hostility Harry had expected. Something older and more personal that had been prepared for a specific kind of encounter and was being disrupted by the encounter not going as planned. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape had said, in a tone that made the words sound like they'd required physical effort. He'd spent the rest of that lesson directing his sharpness at everyone except Harry, which was, Harry thought, its own kind of message. He mentioned this to Hermione. "He loved your mother," she said, without looking up from her potions notes. Harry went still. "I found it in some social history records my Edinburgh contact sent. He and Lily Evans were friends, growing up. The way he looks at you is the way someone looks at something that they find painful." She paused. "That doesn't excuse his behavior toward other students. But it explains why he's specifically angry at you, because you're a reminder of what he chose and what it cost." Harry sat with this for a long moment. Then he said, "We should be careful with him." "Not afraid of him," Hermione said. "Obviously not afraid. Careful. He knows things we need to know, and he has loyalties that are more complicated than they look, and if we treat him as a simple enemy we'll miss something important." Hermione looked up at him. "That's very mature of you." "It's practical," Harry said. But he was quiet for the rest of the evening, which she noticed and let be. Luna found him later, walking the long corridor on the 4th floor that had become his favorite place to think, long enough to walk, high enough to see the grounds through the arrow-slit windows, sufficiently underused that he was generally alone. "Not tonight." Luna materialized from a side passage without announcement, which was so characteristic that Harry didn't startle. "You're thinking about Snape," she said. "And about my mother." Luna walked beside him. Her footsteps were lighter than his. "My mother knew things about people by looking at the space around them rather than at them directly. She said people give away more in what they're protecting than in what they show." "What's Snape protecting?" Harry asked. "Grief," Luna said simply. "And guilt. And something that was done in the name of the wrong side and hasn't been paid for yet." She glanced at him. "He's not a danger to you. He's a danger to himself. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Your mother. When you talk about her, you're not sad in the way I'd expect." Luna considered this with her usual unhurried honesty. "I'm sad," she said. "I'm very sad sometimes, actually. Late at night mostly, or when I find something she would have found interesting and can't tell her." She paused. "But she taught me that grief is something you carry with you in the good direction, not something that sits on top of everything and changes the color of it." A small pause. "She said mourning should be portable." "Portable," Harry repeated. "You have it too," Luna said. "I noticed the first day. You have grief for people you don't remember and that doesn't stop you." It's the same thing." Harry didn't say anything for a moment. The castle moved around them, stones settling, wind finding its way through the high windows. "I think," he said carefully, "that I'm going to find out what Dumbledore actually knows about my parents. Not from him directly, not yet. But there are records." "Gringotts," Luna said. "The archive vault. And the restricted section. Hermione's already working on a plausible excuse for access." Luna smiled. "She asked Professor Flitwick for a research permission slip this morning. She told him she's working on a paper about the historical applications of protective charms for an owl essay competition." "Is that true?" "She's writing the paper now so that it will be true by the time anyone checks." Luna tilted her head. "She's wonderfully practical." "She is," Harry agreed. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the 4th-floor corridor doing its long, patient thing around them. "I've been practicing," Luna said eventually. With the mark. Harry looked at her. It responds to intent. We all know that. But I've been trying to understand the boundary of it, what it amplifies versus what it creates. She held up her left arm, and in the low torchlight the mark was gently visible. I don't think it gives us power we don't already have. I think it clarifies. Like cleaning a window. The light was always there, it's just cleaner passage now. Hermione thinks it's also a channel, Harry said. Between us. She's been tracking whether we notice things faster when we're in proximity. We do, Luna confirmed. The troll, you moved before I told you what I was hearing. You felt something was wrong. That's not just intuition, that's the compact. Information moves between us. Harry thought about this. We should test it deliberately. On our own terms, Luna agreed. Not when someone else is creating the crisis. Right. A torch flared at the end of the corridor. Not alarmingly, the same brief, warm acknowledgement he'd gotten on his first night. The castle likes you, Luna observed. I think it likes all of us, Harry said. I think it remembers what we are. Hogwarts was built by 4 founders who had their own relationship to ancient magic, Luna said. My mother wrote about this, I found her notes in her archive. She thought the castle itself was partly constructed through covenant principles. Which would mean it has awareness, of a kind. Not like a person. But not like a building either. An entity, Harry said. A very old one, Luna agreed. And not currently loyal to any particular person's agenda. She looked at the warm torch. It's been waiting, I think. For something like this. The torchlight in the corridor flared once more, and Harry had the distinct sense, irrational, impossible to prove, and entirely believable, that the castle had heard them and was pleased. December came with cold and the departure of most students for the Christmas holidays and a Hogwarts that was suddenly very quiet, very old, and very much itself. Harry stayed. Hermione stayed because Harry stayed. Luna stayed because she'd asked her father, who had said yes, obviously, be safe, I love you, have you eaten in that order? Ron Weasley stayed, which Harry hadn't expected, and which Ron explained by saying that his parents were visiting his brother Charlie in Romania and he'd rather have Hogwarts than an empty house. Harry accepted this with the simple pleasure of someone who has found friendship to be a more flexible thing than he'd believed. The 4 of them, Harry, Hermione, Luna, Ron, had the castle largely to themselves, and it was during the Christmas break that Harry found the mirror of Eriste. He didn't go looking for it. He was exploring, something he allowed himself more freely with the corridors empty, following the castle's warmth in a direction that felt purposeful, and he turned a corner in an unused classroom and the mirror was there. He stopped. His parents looked back at him from inside it. He knew, intellectually, what the mirror did. Hermione had found the description in their research, shows the viewer the deepest desire of their heart, and that knowledge did not make the moment smaller. His mother had green eyes exactly like his. His father had the same unmanageable hair. They were smiling at him with the particular warmth of people who have waited a long time for something and are finally seeing it. He stood in front of the mirror for what might have been a minute or might have been 20. The castle was quiet around him. His left arm was warm. Then he stepped back. He didn't look away immediately, he let himself look, let himself have this, because denying it would be a different kind of dishonesty. His parents. Real once. Real enough to leave a mark on the world and on him. Real enough that a very powerful man had constructed an entire strategy around what their deaths had done. Then he turned away from the mirror, and he did not come back. He told Hermione and Luna about it that evening. Hermione's expression did the thing it did when she was holding several responses at once and choosing carefully between them. She settled on, "Are you all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "I think, yes." "You only went once," Luna said. It wasn't quite a question. Once was enough. I know what I want. I want them back and I can't have that. Looking at it more doesn't change anything, it just takes up time I could be using. He paused. The mirror is also a tool of Dumbledore's. He's using it to protect the stone, I'd bet on it. Which means he almost certainly knows where it is, which means he almost certainly knows I found it. A test, Hermione said. Or a trap, Harry said. Or both. Luna said, what do you want to do? Harry thought about his mother's green eyes and his father's impossible hair and the warmth that had moved through him like a door opening when he'd stood in front of the glass. He thought about what he'd said to the hat on the sorting stool, you already know. He thought about being the kind of person who doesn't take the bait. Leave it, he said. He's watching to see if I'll obsess over it. So I don't obsess. I acknowledge it and move on. He looked at both of them. But I want to know everything about the obstacles protecting the stone. Every one of them. Not because we're going after it now, but because we need to understand the full picture of what Dumbledore has arranged in this castle. I have 3 of the 6 already mapped, Hermione said, and produced her notebook. Harry looked at it. When did you? I've been working on this since October. She tapped the page. He's used multiple teachers. Charms, transfiguration, care of magical creatures, each obstacle uses one teacher's specialty. Which means he trusts their loyalty or he doesn't care if they figure it out. Both, probably, Luna said. He assumes their loyalty and he doesn't think they'd interfere even if they knew. He assumes a great deal, Harry said. He's been right about most people for a very long time, Hermione said. It's made him predictive in ways that are useful and arrogant in ways that are dangerous. The fire in the common room was the only warm thing in the cold castle, and outside the windows snow was beginning to fall on the grounds and the lake and the dark edge of the forest, and Harry watched it for a moment with the particular feeling of sitting still inside a large, slow thing, the castle, the year, the whole machinery of whatever this was building toward. He's going to try to talk to me, Harry said. He's been waiting for an opportunity since September. He'll have seen the mirror by now and he'll want to make contact. Shape the narrative. He asked you to come to his office before the holidays, Hermione said. I was busy. You had potions revision. Incredibly important potions revision. Luna made a sound that was small and warm and was probably a laugh. When he asks again, Harry said, I'll go. But I want to understand his full hand first. I want to know everything we can know about what he thinks I am before I sit across a desk from him. We have until June, Hermione said. Less than that, Luna said. She was looking at the window rather than the fire, her pale eyes tracking the falling snow. Quirrell is getting worse. Whatever is sharing his body is becoming more confident. I don't think it will wait until the end of the year. Harry felt the mark on his arm pulse once, slow and certain. Then we move when we need to move, he said. Not before. He looked at his 2 friends, Hermione with her notebook, already turning to the next page of calculations, Luna with her silver gaze turned outward to the snow and whatever she saw moving in it, and he felt, clearly and without drama, the thing that the mark had always been trying to tell him. This was not about one boy who survived something impossible. It had never been. It was about 3 sovereign souls who had found each other in a library between natural history and atlases nobody touched, and had spent 2 years getting ready, and were now sitting in the castle that remembered what they were, watching a very old plan come apart at the edges. Outside the window, the snow fell on Hogwarts without hurrying. The castle breathed. Harry turned back to the fire, and they planned. Chapter 4. The weight of other people's plans. Spring arrived at Hogwarts the way it always does in cold places, not gradually but in sudden lurches, a warm day followed by a week of frost, and then one morning the grounds smell like mud and growing things and the lake's surface has changed from iron to something that catches light. Harry noticed it because he noticed everything about the castle. He had been here 8 months and he knew its rhythms the way he'd known Privet Drive's rhythms, which corridors were cold in the mornings, which windows let in the first light, which staircases moved on a schedule versus randomly. But the castle's rhythms were not something to be survived. They were something to be read. What he was reading now, in the second week of April, was that something in the structure of the year was tightening. Quirrell had stopped pretending. Not publicly. Publicly he was still the nervous, stammering defense professor, still reading from the textbook, still performing the vague incompetence that had apparently satisfied the castle's other staff members. But in private moments, catching Harry in the corridor between classes, passing him at the staff table in the morning, the thing behind Quirrell's eyes looked out with increasing frequency and decreasing pretense, and it was doing the same thing it had done on Halloween, assessing. Harry logged it and kept moving. He was in the middle of his end-of-corridor walk on the 4th floor when Dumbledore appeared. Not dramatically. The headmaster simply turned the corner ahead of him, walking in the unhurried way of someone who has been waiting to be in a particular place at a particular time without advertising the fact, and when he saw Harry his expression arranged itself into the warm, grandfather-shaped thing that was his public face. "Harry," he said. "What a pleasant coincidence." Harry's internal response to the word coincidence took approximately 1 second to arrive, and then he set it aside. "Professor Dumbledore. I've been hoping we might have a conversation. You've been a difficult young man to catch." "Potions revision," Harry said pleasantly. "It requires a lot of dedication." Dumbledore's eyes, very blue, very bright, the eyes of someone who has weaponized warmth over a very long period, smiled before his mouth did. He gestured toward a window alcove and Harry walked to it, because refusing would tell the headmaster something, and he wasn't ready for that yet. He had his full picture now. Hermione had completed the mapping of the stone's obstacles in March. Luna had cross-referenced the Gringotts archive material with historical records of the Potters' movements in the year before their deaths. Harry had spent 2 weeks reading between the lines of everything and arriving at a conclusion that was cold and clear and not particularly surprising. Dumbledore had placed James and Lily Potter under the Fidelius charm. He had chosen their secret keeper. He had, through a chain of decisions that were each defensible individually and cumulatively catastrophic, created the conditions for what happened on Halloween 1981. And then he had taken the surviving child and placed him on a doorstep because a blood protection theoretically worked better if the child was miserable, and had spent 10 years arranging for that child to arrive at Hogwarts uninformed and emotionally isolated and prepared to trust whoever offered kindness. Dumbledore looked at Harry with those warm blue eyes, and Harry looked back with the polite regard of someone who knows the full brief and has decided on an approach. "You're settling in well," Dumbledore said. "Your teachers speak very highly of you. All 3 of you, in fact. It's rather unusual to have 3 students of your year performing so consistently at the levels you are." "We've worked hard," Harry said. "Indeed. Though I wonder," Dumbledore turned to look out the window, the classic posture of someone about to say something they want to appear spontaneous, "how long you've been working. Your knowledge of magical history and theory is substantially beyond the first-year curriculum. One might wonder where you encountered it." "Libraries are excellent resources," Harry said. "Muggle libraries?" "Among others." A pause. Dumbledore's mouth curved slightly. "I see." He turned back from the window. "I want you to know, Harry, that whatever questions you have about your past, your parents, the events of your first birthday, I am always available to discuss them. I knew your parents well. I was very fond of them." The mark on Harry's arm was warm and steady, and telling him nothing he didn't already know. "I appreciate that," Harry said. "I do have questions. I've had them for a while." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "I think for now I'm more interested in gathering information than in the answers I'd receive from a particular source. There are multiple perspectives on most historical events, and I find it useful to have as many as possible before forming conclusions." The silence that followed had weight. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, for the first time since they'd been standing here, past the performance of the warm grandfather and with something considerably sharper, and Harry held it with the same even patience he brought to everything. Something moved across the headmaster's face. Not alarm, not anger. Something closer to the expression a chess player gets when an opponent makes a move that changes their understanding of the board. "You are very like your mother," Dumbledore said, and it came out differently than his other sentences. Less performed. Something genuinely meant. "I'll take that," Harry said. Dumbledore nodded once, slow and deliberate. "My door is always open, Harry. When you're ready." "Thank you, Professor." Harry walked away down the fourth-floor corridor, and he didn't hurry, and he didn't look back, and when he turned the corner and was out of sight he let out a slow breath and pressed his hand flat against the wall and felt the castle vibrate with something that was not alarm but was certainly attention. Then he went to find Hermione and Luna. He found them in the library, which was where they went when a question had escalated beyond the common room. Hermione had 3 books open simultaneously, which was her version of rapid processing. Luna was sitting across from her, writing in one of her private notebooks, the ones written in the distributed system they'd established in the first summer, which Harry had never asked to read and which she'd never offered. He sat down and told them about the corridor conversation. Hermione stopped writing mid-word. "He approached you directly. He chose the approach over waiting for you to come to him." "Something moved the timeline," Harry said. "Quirrell," Luna said, without looking up from her notebook. "Dumbledore knows the possession is worsening. If Voldemort moves before the end of the year, through Quirrell, the stone could be compromised before Dumbledore has positioned you as the one to stop it." Harry leaned back in his chair. "He wants me to be the one who goes after it. He's built the whole structure that way," Hermione said, with the controlled frustration she reserved for plans she found structurally offensive. "The obstacles use the teacher's specialties. The troll on Halloween was meant to produce a bonding experience, we disrupted that. The mirror was meant to test your character and show him you wouldn't be consumed by it." She tapped her notes. "Every element is designed to prepare you for a specific narrative where you go through the obstacles alone, reach the stone, face Voldemort, and either defeat him or demonstrate to him that you're the one foretold. Either way, Dumbledore maintains control of the situation because you've played the role." "Except," Harry said. "Except you're not going alone," Hermione said. "You're not going at all unless we decide it's necessary, and if it becomes necessary we go together, and that fundamentally breaks the narrative he needs. It also," Luna said, setting down her pen and looking at them, "presents Dumbledore with a situation he hasn't anticipated. He has planned for 1 sovereign soul. He has no framework for 3. The library was quiet around them, afternoon light falling through the high windows in long shafts, dust moving in the air with the unhurried elegance of things that don't have appointments. "The Gringotts' appointment is in September," Harry said. "The covenant verification. Whatever that unlocks, it changes the financial and legal landscape significantly," Hermione said. "Potentially including formal recognition of sovereign status by Gringotts, which predates and supersedes ministry recognition." She paused. "The goblins don't answer to the ministry." "My father has a contact in the Goblin Diplomatic Office," Luna said. "He's been putting together a story about the covenant verification process for the Quibbler. The goblins have agreed to speak on record because they find the ministry's erasure of their role in the history irritating." A small smile. "My father is very good at finding irritations that make people want to talk. Whatever happens with Quirrell and the stone," Harry said, "happens before September. We need to be ready to move." He looked at both of them. "Are we ready?" Hermione closed the top book, then the second, then aligned all 3 in the precise way she aligned things she was temporarily done with. "I've been ready since February." Luna had already picked up her pen again. "I've been ready since I was 9. Harry thought about what Dumbledore had said, "You are very like your mother," and filed it in the part of himself that was not the strategy and not the analysis but the simple, human fact of being a person who had lost people and would rather not lose any more. Then we watch Quirrell, he said. And when he moves, we move first. May brought the smell of the grounds warming and end-of-year exam anxiety spreading through the student body like a contagion. For most first years this was new. For Hermione it was focused and organized and completely unrelated to fear. For Harry it was primarily a backdrop to the more pressing problem of watching Quirrell unravel. The defense teacher had stopped maintaining the performance. He still showed up to class. He still read from the textbook. But the stammer was gone, replaced by a flat precision that his students noticed without knowing what they were noticing, and in the corridors late at night, Harry knew, because he walked them, because the castle told him when the air changed, Quirrell was making trips to the third-floor corridor that had nothing to do with teaching. The day Harry decided they were out of time was the 13th of May. He was coming back from the Quidditch pitch. He'd gone down alone to fly, which he did when he needed to think, the broom under him and the castle spread out below and the air doing what it did at height, clarifying, and he landed near the entrance to find Professor Snape standing at the edge of the pitch watching him. Snape looked at him with the complicated expression that had been present since the first potions lesson and hadn't simplified. Then he said, without preamble, "You should be careful, Potter, about being outside alone in the evenings." Harry looked at him. Specific advice? Advice of a general nature. Snape turned to go. Then he stopped. Your mother was an extraordinary witch. Her understanding of protective magic was, he stopped again, and the pause was long. She did not accept limitations placed on her by people who believed they knew better. He walked away. Harry stood on the edge of the Quidditch pitch in the warm May evening and looked at the sky going dark above the castle and understood that he had just received a warning from a man who couldn't give it directly without compromising something he wasn't ready to compromise. He went inside and found Hermione and Luna in the common room. "It's tonight," he said. "Or within the next day. Quirrell is going to move." Hermione closed her charms textbook. "How do you know?" "Snape warned me." He sat down. "Indirectly. But he warned me." Luna looked up from her notebook. "Then Dumbledore knows too and he's not stopping it." "Because he needs it to happen," Hermione said. Her voice had gone the cold, clear quality it got when she was done giving people the benefit of the doubt. "He needs Quirrell to attempt the stone so that the attempt can be defeated, because defeating it establishes the narrative going forward. His plan requires the event. He's letting it proceed. With a first year as the intended hero," Harry said. "With you as the intended hero," she corrected. "Specifically you, specifically alone, specifically in circumstances he has designed." The fire in the grate was low. The common room was nearly empty, a few fifth years revising in the corner, paying no attention to the first-year students having a quiet conversation by the window. "We go tonight," Harry said. "Together," Hermione said. "Obviously," Luna said, and she was already putting her notebook away. Ron appeared at his shoulder, which had become, over the course of the year, something Harry had stopped being surprised by. Ron had the specific gift of arriving at exactly the wrong moment to be kept out of something and the specific quality of being trustworthy enough that keeping him out felt wrong. He looked at the three of them with the honest assessment of someone who has been paying attention all year. "You're going through that corridor," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Tonight." "Yes." Ron sat down. "Right. Tell me what I can do." Harry looked at him. He thought about sovereign souls and ancient covenants and the three of them bound together in a library at age 9, and he thought about the fact that protection wasn't the same as exclusion and loyalty wasn't the same as usefulness. "We need the way clear behind us," he said. "If any teacher comes looking, I'll manage it," Ron said, with the steady certainty he brought to chess and to friendship. "I'm good at buying time. You're not coming through the trapdoor." "I know." Ron looked at him steadily. "I know what I am in this and I know what you three are in it. That's fine." He paused. "Just come back." The directness of it hit Harry in the chest the way honest things do. "We will," he said. At 2 in the morning, Harry's corridor sixth sense told him the castle's upper floor wards were shifting, something moving in the third-floor corridor with deliberate intent. He touched Hermione's door, 2 knocks, and heard her immediate movement. Luna was already in the corridor when he stepped out, dressed, wand in hand, with the expression of someone who woke up ready. They moved through the castle in the dark. Harry's lumos lit the way with its characteristic warmth that was slightly too strong for first-year work, and he'd long since stopped apologizing for it. The castle moved around them, stairs holding still, doors opening without being asked, the torches doing their brief acknowledging flare. If Hogwarts had opinions about 3 11-year-olds walking toward a guarded trapdoor at 2 in the morning, those opinions appeared to be approving. The trapdoor was in the third-floor corridor, obvious and not apologetic about it. Beyond it, they could hear the distinct three-headed rumble of something very large sleeping, which was Fluffy, the Cerberus, and which was currently asleep because Quirrell had already been through, had already played music, the lure they'd mapped. "There's a harp still playing," Luna said, listening to a sound they couldn't quite hear yet. "Enchanted," Hermione confirmed, moving to the trapdoor. "Quirrell's work. He wanted his hands free going down." They dropped through. The devil's snare was first. It reacted to Harry's body heat with the enthusiastic grip of something that had been waiting, and he did not panic because Hermione said relax, and it can't hold simultaneously with doing the sunfire charm that drove it back in a wave of brilliant light, and the three of them dropped through to the next chamber. The flying keys were Flitwick's obstacle, a vast, dark space full of keys on wings, a broom waiting, a lock on the door at the far end. This one was designed for a single person on a broom, clearly. Harry took the broom and went up, and Hermione and Luna watched the patterns of the keys, Hermione tracking algorithmically, Luna watching something other than the keys themselves. "Third cluster from the east wall," Luna said. "It's the one flying unevenly. Bent wing. The others are decoys." Harry banked hard, found the key, had it in his hand in one pass, and landed. 12 seconds. The chess set was third. Giant pieces, a board you had to cross, the clear message of a game that required sacrifice. It was Minerva McGonagall's puzzle, and it was the one Harry found genuinely elegant. The chess problem was solvable without sacrifice if you were willing to think outside the movement conventions of standard pieces, which most players weren't because they had been trained not to. Hermione had the solution before they reached the board. She mapped it verbally and they moved through it as a unit, and no one was sacrificed. The troll was already unconscious, which meant Quirrell had reached it before them and had handled it differently than Harry had on Halloween. Harry noted this without guilt. Moving on. Snape's potions puzzle was brilliant: riddle, logic, poisons and potions, 7 bottles, only 2 in useful quantities, and the instruction that told you exactly how limited your options were. Hermione solved it in the time it took Harry to read it once. "There's enough for all 3, she said, which was the answer to the question the puzzle apparently hadn't anticipated. "Snape made the puzzle soluble for 1, Harry said. "Snape made the puzzle," Hermione corrected, looking at the bottles, "and then made it soluble for 3 by using quantities that allowed for it. He could have used less." She picked up the correct bottle and looked at it. "I think he was hoping we'd get this far." Luna said, very quietly, "He knew. He's known something was wrong with Quirrell since the start of term," Harry said. "And he's been trying to address it without compromising his position." He looked at the bottle. "Drink. We go forward." The forward bottle was enough for 3, taken in careful thirds. The final chamber was mirror-dark and stone and had the quality of a space that had been waiting for a specific thing. The mirror of Eriste stood against the far wall, and in front of it, with his back to them, was Quirrell. He turned when he heard them. The turban was gone. The back of his head was visible, and the face on the back of his head was looking at them with the eyes of something that had been dead for 10 years and was furious about it. Voldemort's face on the back of Quirrell's skull looked at Harry with the particular hunger of something that has been waiting for a specific prey for a decade. Then the eyes shifted, and saw not one child but three, and the hunger adjusted into something more careful. More than expected, Quirrell said, in the flat voice he'd been using for weeks. Or Voldemort said, through him. Somewhat, Harry agreed. Quirrell's body turned fully. The face on the back of his head looked between Harry, Hermione, and Luna with the cold assessment of someone revising a threat calculation. You're not what you should be, it said. No, Harry said. We're not. The boy who survived. I've studied you for a decade. I know what you are. The eyes on Voldemort's partial face were red and fixed and burning with intelligence. A fluke. A child who benefited from his mother's sacrifice. Among other things, Harry said. There is no among other things. You are one element of a prophecy that I have spent years preparing to resolve. You've read the prophecy? Hermione said. A pause. Enough of it. The full text, she pressed. I have heard from whom, she said, and her voice was the same tone she used when she'd caught a source making a factual error. Because the full text hasn't been publicly available since it was given, and the only people with access to it are the ones it was given to and Albus Dumbledore, and both of those groups have strong incentives to share selectively. Voldemort's red eyes moved to Hermione with the expression of someone encountering an unexpected variable. Then they moved to Luna. Luna was looking at him with her silver eyes and the expression of someone reading a very interesting document. You're frightened, she said, with the same matter-of-fact certainty she brought to everything. Not of us, specifically. Of what we represent. The Covenant brand means the rules you've been operating by, the rules about power and sacrifice and inevitability, don't apply here. Nothing is inevitable, Voldemort said, and there was something in the way he said it that was not a statement about them but about himself, and that something was very close to the truth. No, Luna agreed. Nothing is. Quirrell lurched toward Harry, and the thing happened that Harry had felt building since September, the mark on his arm blazing hot, no longer warm, blazing, and this time it was not directional in the way of not this but in the way of something that understood what it was protecting and why. Quirrell's hands made contact with Harry's arm. The scream was Quirrell's and Voldemort's both. What came through Harry was not rage and not calculation and not the performed certainty of someone performing power. It was the same thing it had always been, since the first time he'd blown out the windows of the school gymnasium at age 7, something that came up from underneath thought, older than thought, the wordless no not this made enormous by 2 years of preparation and the presence of two people who carried the same mark. He felt Hermione and Luna the way you feel people standing beside you without looking, their presence adding to the current the way tributaries add to a river, the same mark resonating across the three of them, ancient magic moving through all three channels at once and coming out in Harry's hands where Quirrell was touching him. Quirrell fell back. He didn't fall dramatically. He stepped back and looked at his own hands and on his face, both faces, there was something that was not pain, exactly, but was the expression of something encountering a force it has no category for. What is? Quirrell's own voice, confused, returned briefly. What's happening? Voldemort's voice cut over it, the Covenant. It's the Covenant brand, you fool, and then the red eyes focused on Harry with something that was in the vicinity of fear and considerably past recognition. You are not just the boy. No, Harry said. We're not. The mark blazed again, and this time it came from all three of them without coordination, without strategy, because that was what the compact did, it moved when it needed to move, clean and precise and connected to something that did not negotiate. What left Quirrell's body left it like a sigh. The defense professor dropped to his knees, and then to his hands, and the face on the back of his skull faded, not dramatically, not with thunder and spectacle, but with the quality of a thought that has been interrupted before it could be completed. Voldemort's presence drained out of the room the way smoke drains out of a room when you open a window. What was left was Quirrell, small and human and suddenly very clearly dying, the possession's withdrawal taking with it something that had been keeping the host functional for a long time. Harry knelt beside him. Quirrell looked up at him with his own eyes, watery, brown, suddenly his own again. I didn't want, he stopped. I was weak, he said. That's all. I was just weak. I know, Harry said. It was the kindest thing he could find and also the truest. Quirrell closed his eyes. Harry stood up. The mirror was behind him, and he hadn't looked at it once since entering the room, and he didn't look at it now. He turned to Hermione and Luna. Hermione had a line between her brows that wasn't quite grief but was adjacent to it, the expression she got when a situation was resolved but not cleanly, when the cost of the resolution was visible. Luna looked at Quirrell with the expression of someone acknowledging a thing that has ended. The stone, Hermione said. Harry turned. Somehow, without consciously deciding to use the mirror, the stone was in his pocket. He felt it there, smooth and warm, which meant the protection had worked as Dumbledore had designed it, which meant Dumbledore had, in that specific thing, been right. He'll be here soon, Harry said. Dumbledore. Yes, Hermione said. What do we tell him? Everything true, Luna said. We don't lie. We don't omit. We tell him exactly what happened, because the truth is already better than anything he expected. Harry looked at the room, the mirror, the empty chamber, the stone warm in his pocket, Quirrell still on the floor. He expected a boy who barely survived this, Harry said. What he's going to find is 3 people who walked through his obstacles, identified his trap, and resolved his crisis without being managed. It's going to change things, Hermione said. Everything's going to change, Harry said. That was always the point. The warmth and the mark on his arm had eased from blazing back to its resting temperature, steady, patient, permanent as ever. In his pocket the stone waited, useless now that Voldemort was gone from this form, valuable now as a fact, as evidence of what had happened here. Somewhere above them, the castle made a sound that was very close to satisfaction. Dumbledore arrived 20 minutes later. Harry was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, Hermione on his left reading the label on a potion bottle from the previous chamber that she'd brought along for analysis, Luna on his right with her eyes closed in the particular not sleeping way that meant she was listening to something wide and distant. Dumbledore took in the room in a single, comprehensive look, Quirrell on the floor, the mirror behind them, 3 children sitting calmly against the wall, and his face did something that Harry watched with full attention. It was grief. Real grief, not performed. And underneath it, something that was either humility or the beginning of it. Quirinus, he said, and knelt beside the defense teacher with a gentleness that was entirely unguarded. Harry let him have a moment with that. Then Dumbledore stood, and looked at Harry, and the blue eyes were stripped of the warm grandfather entirely. What was behind them was very old and very tired and looking at Harry with the specific attention of someone who has built a model and is confronting its failure. Harry took the stone from his pocket and held it out. Dumbledore looked at it in Harry's hand. Then he looked at Harry's face. You weren't supposed to be here, he said. Not accusatory, almost wondering. No, Harry said. You planned for a different version of me. I did. Dumbledore took the stone carefully, and held it, and looked at it with the expression of someone saying goodbye to something. I planned for a boy who didn't know. Who would need guidance. Who would trust the guidance because he had nothing else to trust. I know, Harry said. You've known for some time. 2 years. Dumbledore looked at him. Then at Hermione, then Luna. All 3 of you. The ancient magic made us equal, Luna said, her eyes still closed. It was impolite of the plan not to account for that. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. It was not a full smile. It was the expression of someone who has encountered something that, despite everything, they find genuine. Your mother, he said to Harry, argued with me every time I tried to tell her what to do. Your father thought most of my plans were entertaining at best. It seems, he looked between the three of them, that I have been attempting to manage people who are constitutionally opposed to being managed. We're not opposed to working with you, Hermione said. We're opposed to being arranged. She paused. There's a significant difference. I am beginning, Dumbledore said slowly, to understand that. Voldemort is gone from this form, Harry said. Not destroyed. We both know that. He'll come back eventually, in some other form, through some other method. Yes. And when he does, we'll face it together. The three of us. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Not as pieces in a plan. As people who have decided to be involved. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The blue eyes had something in them that Harry hadn't expected to see there, something that might have been respect, arriving late but arriving genuinely. I have a great deal, the headmaster said quietly, that I owe you. All three of you. And not only in information. He held the stone and looked at it once more. I will begin. It was not the full capitulation Harry had read about in histories of people who changed their positions, it was not dramatic or complete, and there would be, he knew, arguments and resistance and the slow grinding work of making a very old, very intelligent, very certain man revise himself. But it was real. He could tell the difference between performance and the genuine article, and this was the genuine article. The archive vault at Gringotts, Harry said. We have an appointment in September. I'd like you to consider that whatever's in that vault belongs to me and not to anyone's plan. Yes, Dumbledore said. I know. And I'd like you to tell me everything about my parents that you haven't told me. Not now. But over time, and not strategically. Because you owe them that. Dumbledore closed his hand around the philosopher's stone. Yes, he said again, and this time it was lower. I do. Harry nodded once, and then stood up, and helped Hermione to her feet, and Luna opened her eyes and rose with her characteristic absence of effort, and the three of them walked toward the passage that led back up through the obstacles and the trapdoor and the sleeping three-headed dog and up through the castle to the world that was waiting to reckon with what had just happened. Harry's arm was warm and steady all the way up. The end of year had the particular quality of things that have been resolved but not concluded, the school buzzing with rumors, Dumbledore's brief and carefully worded announcement about Quirrell's absence, the House Cup going to Gryffindor in circumstances that provoked intense speculation, and 3 first-years who declined to provide a narrative and offered it was a complicated situation with uniform pleasantness when asked. Dumbledore's end-of-year feast speech awarded points that shifted the House Cup, as in the original plan, but the speech itself was different. He looked at Harry when he announced the points, and then he looked at Hermione and Luna, and the look was not the warm grandfather performance. It was direct. An acknowledgement between people who understand each other. The train home was loud with departing students and sugar and end-of-year relief. They had their compartment to themselves, mostly. Ron came and went, mostly for the snack trolley, which he approached with consistent dedication. Harry sat with his legs stretched out and his head against the window and watched England come back into view, the magic of the countryside falling away behind them as they headed back toward the Muggle world that had been all he'd known for 10 years. Next year, Hermione said. Next year, he agreed. Luna was writing in her notebook. The Gringotts appointment is September 15th. Whatever the covenant verification produces, it changes the formal legal landscape. Dumbledore's control of Harry's financial and educational circumstances becomes much harder to maintain. And his information advantage disappears over time, Hermione said. Especially once we start accessing the archive vault. Harry thought about Dumbledore's face in the underground chamber, the real one, stripped of performance, old and tired and beginning to understand that the chess game he'd been playing for 10 years had a 4th player nobody had counted. 3 players. 3 pieces that moved together and couldn't be sacrificed individually because they weren't individual. He thought about Voldemort, gone from Quirrell's skull but not gone, somewhere in the margins of things, thinking its careful, cold thoughts about prophecies and power and the boy who had survived. He thought about Sirius Black, whose name he had found in the archive material, wrongfully imprisoned, the last piece of his parents' story that hadn't yet been resolved. He thought about a world that had decided what he was before he was old enough to hold an opinion. He was 12 years old. He had 2 years of preparation behind him, a year of Hogwarts behind him, a covenant mark on his arm, and 2 people sitting across from him who had decided independently, at age 9 in a library, that they were going to be exactly what ancient magic said they were. Outside the window, England settled around them, ordinary and green and full of people who didn't know what had happened last night in a chamber under a school, or 2 years before that in a library on Cavendish Street, or 11 years before that on a night in October when a woman with green eyes had placed herself between her child and something that believed nothing could stop it. Something had. Something was. The mark on Harry's arm pulsed once, warm and certain and entirely without urgency. He closed his eyes, and let the train carry them home. Chapter 5. The year they stopped asking permission. The summer between 4th and 5th year tasted like smoke and iron and the specific bitterness of a world that had been lying to itself for a long time and was now being forced to stop. Harry had died at the end of a graveyard. Technically. Or close enough to it that the distinction felt academic when he was lying on the grass with Cedric's body beside him and Voldemort standing 40 feet away and the night sky wheeling overhead like it was looking for something to do about this. He hadn't died. None of them had. But the graveyard had happened, Voldemort had returned in full, and the wizarding world had spent the entire summer doing what it always did with things it found inconvenient, denying them, loudly and institutionally, with the full bureaucratic weight of people whose positions depended on the denial. The prophet called Harry a liar. Fudge called Dumbledore power-hungry. People who had trembled at the mention of a name for 14 years now said that name easily, laughingly, to prove they didn't believe what they privately feared was entirely true. Harry watched this from Privet Drive with the particular patience of someone who has learned to read the difference between what systems say and what they do, and what the system was doing was preparing. Dolores Umbridge had been appointed to the Hogwarts teaching staff. Harry knew her name from records, ministry bureaucrat, known for the Dementor attack authorization, responsible for laws that had systematically reduced the rights of non-human magical beings. She had been inserted into Hogwarts with the specific mandate of reporting back to Fudge, controlling the narrative, and ensuring that nothing Harry, Hermione, or Luna said about what happened in that graveyard gained institutional traction. He had learned her appointment from Luna's father, who had published it in the Quibbler 3 weeks before the Daily Prophet acknowledged it. Hermione arrived at Privet Drive on the 23rd of August with her parents, who were now sufficiently accustomed to the rhythm of this to pull up to number 4 and help with trunk loading with the ease of people who have incorporated unusual things into their ordinary lives. She sat on Harry's bed, which was a real bed now, in a real room, because after the events of first year and the Gringotts Covenant verification in September and the legal correspondence that had followed, the Dursleys had received certain clarifying communications from certain Goblin legal representatives that had produced an immediate and permanent change in Harry's living arrangements. He had not arranged this as revenge. He had arranged it because it was necessary and practical and because he was done being made small. Hermione sat on the bed and looked at him and said, "How are you?" Not a question. The specific tone of someone who wants the true answer. "I keep seeing Cedric," Harry said. Not as a dream, not as a flashback. Just, he's there. The way something is there when you know you should have been faster. You weren't slower than you should have been, Hermione said. You were in a situation deliberately engineered to produce casualties. The accountability for Cedric belongs to Voldemort and Pettigrew and Bartemius Crouch Jr. and every ministry official who chose denial over preparation. I know that, Harry said. Knowing it and feeling it are different. I know that too. He looked at his hands. The scar on his arm from Pettigrew's knife had healed but left something, not a mark, exactly, but a memory in the tissue. Luna's coming? Tomorrow morning. She and her father are in London for his August editorial meeting. Hermione paused. She wrote to me last week. She said she's been having the same thing, not Cedric specifically, but the weight of the graveyard. She called it, carrying something that isn't quite grief because you didn't lose it yourself. That's exactly what it is, Harry said. She has a gift for naming things accurately. Hermione looked at him steadily. This year is going to be different from the others. Not just harder, different. Umbridge isn't Quirrell, she's not possessed, she's not serving a master she resents. She believes in what she's doing. That makes her more dangerous in the immediate, practical sense. I've been thinking about that, Harry said. He stood and went to the window, and the August garden outside was doing its ordinary thing, petunias, roses very organized, the hedge very even, the whole street very determinately normal. Quirrell wanted something specific and his methods were directed toward that specific thing. Umbridge wants control as a principle. That means everything we do becomes a threat, not just the things that specifically inconvenience her agenda. She'll use the students as instruments, Hermione said. Inquisitorial squads, house points, detentions. She'll try to establish an environment where the students police each other. She'll fail at that with a significant portion of them, Harry said. Because we have been visible at Hogwarts for 4 years and people have been watching. He turned from the window. We need to turn that into something. Hermione's eyes did the sharp bright thing. A teaching organization. Something more than a class. Something that operates on trust between students because the official channel has been compromised. Dumbledore's army, Hermione said, and then looked slightly surprised at herself for how quickly it had come out. Is that what you've been calling it? I've been thinking about it since June. She opened her bag, which was charmed for expanded capacity, and produced a notebook Harry didn't recognize, new, started recently, the pages at the front still flat. I've been mapping who. Across all houses, all years. People who have watched what we do and have arrived at their own conclusions about what this year is going to need. Harry sat back down. Show me. She showed him, and he read through it, and then he looked up and said, Neville Longbottom. Yes. His parents were tortured to incapacity by Bellatrix Lestrange. He has more personal stake in this than almost anyone in the school. And he's been improving in every practical subject since second year. He's not the weakest student in his year, he's the most undermined one. Hermione tapped the name. He needs someone to be clear with him that he's capable. Once that happens, I think he's extraordinary. The Weasley twins, Harry said. Obviously. They're going to be difficult to organize because they run on their own schedule, but they're brilliant and they have reach across the entire student body. Ginny Weasley. She faced the basilisk alone in second year. She's been carrying that for 3 years. She's been training herself in secret. Hermione paused. I found her in an unused classroom doing hex practice at midnight in March. She's very good. Harry looked at the list for a long moment. It was long. It was longer than he'd expected, which meant the 4 years of being visible and unapologetic and refusing to perform smallness had done something, quietly, in the student body's relationship to what was possible. Luna needs to be part of the organizing, Harry said. She already is. In her own way. She's been having conversations with people across houses for 3 years that I don't think either of us has fully tracked. A slight smile. Luna does a great deal of very effective work in a way that looks like just existing. How do you know? Harry asked. My father's source at the ministry sent a memo last night. She poured herself tea with the calm efficiency of someone entirely at home. The request has already been approved. She arrives at Hogwarts with the title of High Inquisitor. Which gives her the authority to observe and assess any teacher, Hermione said. And to recommend dismissal. Luna looked up. She will use it first against teachers who are allies. Trelawney, Harry said. Trelawney is obvious, Hermione said. But I think the real target is Hagrid. She's been building a case about his qualifications since he was appointed. Removing him disrupts something that's personal to Harry and Ron. She'll leave Snape alone, Harry said. He's too connected to ministry-adjacent interests. Flitwick and Sprout she'll tolerate because they're not visible enough to be threatening. McGonagall she'll try and fail with because McGonagall has 40 years of institutional authority and a spine that appears to be made of tungsten. Luna made the small warm sound. That's a very accurate description of Professor McGonagall. The question, Harry said, is how we play it. She comes in wanting us afraid and compliant and feeding the ministry's narrative. So we're not afraid and not compliant, but we're also not loud about it in the way she can use. We do the work, Hermione said. Quietly and thoroughly and completely outside her jurisdiction. And when she pushes, we push back, Harry said. Correctly. On record. With evidence and procedure, not with anger, because anger gives her the narrative she wants. Luna looked at both of them. There will be moments where the correct response is anger, she said. Not performed anger. Real anger. Those moments matter because they're true, and you can't always outmaneuver someone using only precision. Sometimes you have to stand up and say this is wrong and mean it with your whole body. Harry looked at her. I know the strategy, she said. I also know that strategy without feeling becomes a different kind of performance. We don't hide who we are. That was our rule from the beginning. You're right, Harry said. Of course I am, she said, without any arrogance in it. The Hogwarts Express was loud and September warm, and when Harry, Hermione, and Luna boarded they found that their compartment was not empty. Neville was there, and Ginny, and the twins were passing briefly in the corridor in the way of people whose schedule is genuinely unclear, and Ron was eating something and reading a Quidditch magazine and looked up with the genuine pleasure he brought to seeing people he'd missed. The compartment filled with the warm noise of people who have known each other through enough to be past the performing stage of friendship. Harry watched the interactions and thought about Hermione's notebook, all those names, and felt the year taking its shape. He caught Neville looking at him across the compartment, the look Neville had been giving him since third year, the one that was trying to ask something it hadn't yet found the words for. Neville, Harry said. Everyone else kept talking. Neville looked at him, startled at being addressed directly. I want to do something this year, Harry said. A teaching group. Practical defense, beyond what the curriculum offers. People who want to actually learn. He kept it simple, no theater. I'd like you to be part of it. Neville looked at him for a moment, and Harry could see the thing happening in Neville's face, the familiar calculation of someone who has been told consistently by systems they can't perform and is trying to decide whether to trust a different assessment. I'm not very good at defense, Neville said. You've been improving by about 20% a term since second year, Harry said. I've been watching. You're not behind, you've been disadvantaged. Different thing. Neville was quiet for a second. Then he said, my parents. I know about your parents, Harry said. If you want to talk about it sometime, I'm willing. If you don't, that's fine too. But it's part of why I'm asking you specifically. Neville looked at his hands, then back up at Harry. Something in his face had changed in a small, foundational way, the way a room changes when someone finally opens a window. Yeah, he said. Okay. Umbridge's first defense lesson happened on Thursday, and it was worse than Harry had built himself up for, which was saying something. She walked in wearing pink robes the color of something cheerful that has been deployed as a weapon, and she smiled with the particular smile of someone who has decided they know exactly what they're dealing with, and she outlined her theory of education with the bright confidence of someone who has mistaken compliance for learning. Theory only. No practical magic. The ministry's approved and revised curriculum. No discussion of actual defensive application until further notice. Harry opened the textbook to page 1 and began reading. He did not raise his hand to argue the point. He did not look up at Umbridge's simpering explanation of why practical application wasn't necessary at their stage. He read the textbook, which was inadequate, and took notes in the margins about where the inadequacy was specifically located, which was the more useful document. Hermione raised her hand. "Are you telling us," she said, with the precise, pleasant tone of someone who has decided to be heard within the system before going around it, that this course will contain no practical spell work? For any of the year? That's correct, Miss Granger. Hermione Granger. A pause. The OWL examination for defense against the dark arts has a practical component that accounts for 40% of the final grade. Umbridge's smile hardened at the edges. The Ministry's revised curriculum has been specifically designed to exclude preparation for 40% of the qualifying examination? Hermione said. That does seem like an oversight worth noting. The classroom was very still in the specific way of a room full of 15-year-olds realizing something interesting is happening. 5 points from Gryffindor, Miss Granger, for speaking out of turn. Of course, Hermione said, and wrote something in her notes. Harry, beside her, was writing too. Not notes about the textbook. A list of practical defensive spells, organized by utility and complexity, that the class needed and would not receive from this course. He passed it to Ron without looking up. Ron read it, made a sound that was very quiet, and passed it to Neville, who read it and turned to look at Harry with the expression of someone who has just received confirmation of something they were hoping was true. Umbridge swept the class with her gaze, landing on Harry. Mr. Potter. Professor Umbridge. You have something to say, I imagine. I'm attentive to the lesson, Harry said pleasantly. She looked at him with the assessment of someone who has studied a target in advance and is now measuring the reality against the preparation. I've heard a great deal about you, Mr. Potter. A great deal. I imagine you have, he said. The Ministry is very interested in ensuring that Hogwarts students receive a balanced, appropriate education. Particularly given certain claims that have been circulating in the past months. Claims that could cause unnecessary alarm. Voldemort has returned, Harry said. The room inhaled. Umbridge went very still. Then the smile came back, wider, with nothing warm in it. Detention, Mr. Potter. Tonight. My office. Of course, Harry said, exactly as Hermione had said it, and returned to his textbook notes. The detention was the educational component Harry hadn't put on his practical spell list. He arrived at Umbridge's office at 7, which was carpeted in pink and contained many decorative plates featuring cats, and Umbridge sat behind her desk with the expression of someone who has been looking forward to a task they find professionally satisfying. The special quill. The words carved into the back of his hand. I must not tell lies. He'd known about this. He'd read the accounts of it in the records his Edinburgh contact had eventually sent, disciplinary practices at Hogwarts over the decades, testimonials from former students, third-party reports. He had known it was possible. Knowing it was possible and having it happen to his hand were two different events, and he sat through the first evening with his jaw set and his face neutral, and when he walked out afterward he looked at the raised lettering on the back of his hand and felt something that was not the outrage Umbridge wanted to produce. It was clarity. He went to find Hermione and Luna, who were in the common room, and he showed them his hand. Hermione's face went through several things rapidly: shock, anger, the specific cold fury she reserved for things that were structurally wrong rather than personally offensive, and landed on something steady and determined. Luna looked at his hand, and then up at his face. She used a blood quill, she said. Yes. That's illegal. It's specifically prohibited in the Decree on Appropriate Disciplinary Practices, 1947. I know. You're going to let it happen more than once, Hermione said. Not a question. Once is enough for the documentation, Harry said. I don't need evidence beyond this. But going to the headmaster or the Ministry immediately plays her game. She wants me reactive, she wants me running to authority figures. So. He sat down. We document it. We gather corroboration from other students she's used it on. We build the full picture. And when we use it where it has maximum impact. Rita Skeeter, Hermione said. Luna tilted her head. Skeeter is unreliable. Skeeter is a weapon, Hermione said. We know how she operates. We can direct it. She wrote lies about Harry in 4th year because the story served her. If we give her a true story that also serves her, she'll publish it, and the Quibbler runs the same story the same week as credible corroboration. My father will publish anything we document accurately, Luna said. He's been waiting for a story this specific for 3 years. Harry looked at both of them. The mark on his arm was warm. We do the two things simultaneously. Build the teaching group and build the case against Umbridge. They're connected. The group is the evidence that defense is being deliberately withheld, and the case against her is the infrastructure that protects the group. The Hog's Head, Hermione said, already thinking through logistics. First meeting. Small, only people we've specifically approached. Let people sign up rather than recruiting, it gives them ownership of the decision. Neville's in, Harry said. Ginny. The twins. I'll speak to Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones, Hermione said. Susan Bones, who had been in the bathroom with the troll in 1st year, had been a quiet ally since then, never close, but consistent. I'll speak to Cho Chang and some of the Ravenclaws, Luna said. I've been having conversations with them about the curriculum for 2 years. Of course you have, Harry said. The Hog's Head meeting produced 28 signatures on a piece of parchment that Hermione charmed with a jinx. Anyone who betrayed the group's existence would find their face covered in boils that spelled out the word sneak, which was Harry's suggestion and which Hermione had implemented with the cheerful efficiency of someone who finds protective magic to be a moral good. He stood at the front of the room and looked at the 28 people looking back at him and felt, sharply and fully, the weight of what he was asking them to take on. Umbridge is going to find out about this eventually, he said. Not from any of you, I trust that. But eventually. So I want to be clear about what this is before anyone commits to it. He looked around the room, Neville in the front row, Ginny with her arms crossed and her chin up, the twins with the focused attention they showed for things they decided to take seriously, Ron with his characteristic honest expression, 20 other faces from 4 houses and 5 years. This is not a club. It's not a study group. It's preparation for a war that is coming whether we prepare for it or not. I have been to the graveyard where Voldemort came back. I have stood in front of him. Cedric Diggory died there. I am telling you what I saw because you have the right to know what you are preparing for. The room was very quiet. I'm not going to manage what you know, Harry said. I'm not going to give you an easier version of the truth because it's more comfortable. I'm going to teach you what works, and I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to treat you like the people who will have to use it. Because you will. He paused. Any questions before we start? Neville raised his hand, then seemed to decide that was too formal for the occasion and just said, "What do we start with?" Harry looked at him. Expelliarmus, he said. Because it is the most reliable disarming spell and because disarming is more useful in more situations than any combat hex, and because knowing the basic forms better than your opponent is almost always better than knowing more advanced forms badly. He raised his wand, and Hermione and Luna moved to flank him at the front of the room, and the room shifted into a working space. The first session lasted 3 hours. People left sweaty and surprised and with the specific bright-eyed quality of students who have been taught something rather than lectured at. Neville had successfully disarmed Seamus Finnegan on his 5th attempt. Ginny had disarmed Neville and Harry simultaneously, the latter by using a slight angle variation that Harry had pointed out and she had immediately applied with a precision that made him think Hermione's assessment, extraordinary, was an understatement. After everyone else had gone, Harry, Hermione, and Luna stood in the emptying room, and Harry looked at the space where 28 people had been working. That's what this should have always been, he said. It is now, Hermione said. Neville's going to be remarkable, Luna said. I think by the end of the year he'll be one of the strongest in the group. I think so too, Harry said. The year moved through its darkness with the quality of something building toward something, which was the quality of all the years so far but more compressed now, more urgent, the stakes visible above the surface instead of moving beneath it. Umbridge escalated, as predicted. Educational Decree 24 disbanded all student organizations, which was the moment the DA became the thing it was always going to be, not a club that could be disbanded but a functioning resistance movement that had learned to operate quietly. They moved meeting locations, used a rotation that Hermione organized, communicated through the enchanted coins that she developed and distributed. Harry found the coins in her notes one evening and looked at them and said, "Hermione, this is extraordinary magic." She looked at them with the slight satisfaction of someone who has solved a complex problem. The protean charm is NEWT level technically. I adapted it. You adapted NEWT level magic in your 5th year. I was motivated, she said. Luna was wearing her coin on a chain around her neck. She touched it occasionally with the same gesture she'd used toward the covenant mark since they were 9, not checking that it was there, confirming that it mattered. Umbridge put Harry in detention repeatedly. He attended each one and carved the words in the back of his hand and walked out with his face neutral and added the session to the documented record, and after the 8th session Hermione said it was enough and she sent the material through a chain that ended at Rita Skeeter, and the Quibbler published a cover story the same week as a Skeeter article in the Prophet, and the combination, one mainstream, one alternative, both with documented evidence and named sources, hit the wizarding public in the way of something that couldn't be easily dismissed. Fudge called it a smear campaign. The blood quill marks on the back of Harry's hand, photographed by Luna with a camera borrowed from Colin Creevey and reproduced in both publications, called it something else. 3 parents contacted the ministry demanding investigation. The investigation went nowhere, because the ministry was Fudge's ministry, but the letters existed. The record existed. Harry added them to the file he was building with the long-game patience of someone who understands that systems fall when their record can't be defended. Dumbledore watched all of this. He had, since the end of 1st year, been doing what he'd said he would do, slowly, imperfectly, with the difficulty of an extremely intelligent man revising positions he'd held for decades, but doing it. He had given Harry the archive vault access in September of 2nd year. He had provided, over the intervening years, information about Harry's parents in the careful installments of someone paying a debt they know can't be fully paid. He had not tried to manage the DA, though Harry suspected he knew about it. What Dumbledore had not done was stop Umbridge. Harry confronted him about this in November, in the headmaster's office, standing in front of the desk and meeting those blue eyes without the deference the office was designed to produce. "You have the authority to remove her," Harry said. The ministry placed her because you gave them an opening by allowing the narrative of last year to go uncontested publicly, Harry said. "I know you've been working through channels. I know the Wisengamot conversations. I know the international correspondence." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "But she is carving words into students' hands in this building and you have not publicly stated that this is unacceptable." Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes had no performance in them. "No," he said. "I haven't." "Why?" A long pause. "Because saying so would precipitate a confrontation with the ministry that I am not yet prepared to win." "How many more sessions before you're prepared?" Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet. "The answer matters to me and to the other students she's using it on." Harry put both hands flat on the desk. "We are not pieces on your board. When you stay silent about this, you are making a calculation about what we are worth in relation to your strategy. I need you to understand that I see that calculation clearly, and I am telling you that it is wrong." The silence in the office was complete. Then Dumbledore said, quietly, "You are right. I know. I will." He stopped. Restarted. "I will make a formal statement to the Board of Governors regarding sanctioned disciplinary instruments. It will not remove Umbridge immediately but it will create formal record. And an owl to the parents of every student she has used it on, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Their parents deserve to know, Harry said. The students deserve to not carry this alone while the adults in authority decide when it's strategically convenient to acknowledge it. A long pause. Yes, Dumbledore said. You're right about that too. Harry straightened up. I don't enjoy these conversations. I imagine not. I'm not doing this to score points against you. I know that, Dumbledore said. And then, with the specific weight of something that costs the speaker, I am sorry, Harry. Not as a general statement. I am sorry for specific things that I made specific choices about, and I am working on being someone different than the person who made those choices. He looked across the desk. I am aware that working on it is not the same as having already done it. Harry looked at him for a moment. I know the difference, he said. I'm accounting for it. He left, and Hermione was in the corridor outside because she had been in the corridor the whole time in case she was needed, and Luna was at the end of the corridor by a window looking out at the grounds with the expression of someone listening to the building, and they fell into step together and walked back toward Gryffindor Tower in the way they moved through everything. The Department of Mysteries was Voldemort's doing. The vision came to Harry in December, Nagini, Arthur Weasley in a ministry corridor, the snake attacking, and it was real. He knew it was real the way he knew everything connected to Voldemort was real, the scar burning with a specific clarity that was different from pain and more like information. He told Hermione and Luna first. Then he told Dumbledore, and was believed immediately because this time Dumbledore had no strategic reason not to believe him. Arthur Weasley was found and treated. But the visions didn't stop. And by June Harry understood what Voldemort was doing, using the connection, the link through the scar, to draw him toward the Ministry, toward the Department of Mysteries, toward a prophecy that Voldemort believed was the key to his permanent victory. The night of the Ministry was the night that Harry stopped waiting. They went, Harry, Hermione, Luna, Ron, Neville, Ginny, 6 members of the DA+3, because Sirius was in danger, because the vision said so, because Harry's connection to Voldemort had been burning with the specific heat of something intended rather than accidental, and they hadn't been fast enough to sort that out before they were already moving. The Department of Mysteries received them with the particular quality of a place that operates outside the usual rules of space and meaning. Doors to rooms that contradicted each other. The brain room, the death room, the time room with its spinning hourglasses and the bell jar of embryo light. And the Hall of Prophecy, which was their destination, which was where the trap closed. 12 Death Eaters. 6 students. Hermione went down in the first minute, a curse from behind that she didn't see, something that wasn't life-threatening but took her out of the fight with a brutal efficiency, and Harry felt it through the mark the way you feel someone grab your arm, sharp and immediate. Luna was already fighting, not defensively, not with the hesitation of someone surprised by violence, but with the focused precision of someone who has been preparing for exactly this for 4 years. Her spells were Ravenclaw brilliant, unexpected, aimed at the structural disadvantages of their opponents rather than at the opponents directly, a reducto aimed at the shelf beside the nearest Death Eater that sent prophecy orbs cascading across the floor, turning the space into a hazard that required attention, a confundus applied to the largest threat while he was looking somewhere else, a movement pattern that was too unpredictable to target cleanly. Harry and Neville were back to back. Neville, who had been afraid of Snape and had been told for his entire school career that he was weak and fumbling and one step behind everyone, was not currently any of those things. He was a 15-year-old boy with parents in St. Mungo's and a wand that had clearly been waiting to do this, and he was holding his side of the fight with a ferocity that Harry felt as something personal and deeply earned. Together, Harry said, and meant it the way he'd meant it in the library at age 9. Together, Neville said, and he didn't sound like someone who was surprised by himself. He sounded like someone who has finally found the situation that matches what they've always been. The DA fought. They lost ground and took ground, and Hermione got back on her feet in the 3rd minute with her face white and her wand up, and Ron was hit with something that made him laugh uncontrollably and then sleep, which was terrifying until Luna put 2 fingers on his throat and confirmed his pulse was strong and regular. Ginny broke her ankle and kept fighting on it, which Harry witnessed and filed under things to respect absolutely. The order arrived: Lupin, Mad-Eye, Tonks, Kingsley, Sirius. Sirius was alive. Not trapped. He'd never been trapped because the vision had been constructed, which Harry had understood somewhere in the middle of the Ministry's contradictory doors and hadn't been able to stop because the momentum was already there. Voldemort arrived because Voldemort had planned this. The atrium. The confrontation. The thing that Harry had been building toward since the graveyard. He stood in the Ministry atrium with Hermione and Luna on either side of him. Luna had positioned herself without discussion, the 3 of them in the triangle they'd been in since the underground chamber in first year, and Voldemort looked at him with those red eyes and the cold, brilliant intelligence behind them, and looked at the other 2, and understood, for the first time with full comprehension, what he was looking at. The Covenant, Voldemort said. It came out different from how it had come out of Quirrell's stolen mouth 4 years ago. Not alarmed. Interested. The intelligence in those red eyes doing what it always did, processing, adapting. The ancient magic compact. 3 souls of equal sovereignty. He looked at Harry. Your mother's sacrifice created the bond that defeated me. She acted within the framework of the oldest magic. And you, somehow you found the others. They found me, Harry said. And the magic recognized them. Yes. Voldemort was quiet for a moment, and in that moment Harry saw something he hadn't expected to see: genuine thought, not the performed certainty of a man who believes in his own inevitability, but the working mind of someone reconsidering premises. Voldemort was brilliant. He always had been. That was the most dangerous thing about him. The prophecy says neither can live while the other survives, Voldemort said. It does not account for 3. No, Harry said. It doesn't. Which means either the prophecy is incomplete, or it was written for a version of this that doesn't exist anymore, Luna said, from Harry's right, with the complete calm of someone stating an obvious fact. Voldemort's eyes moved to her. They stayed there for a moment with the specific attention of something encountering a thing it hasn't categorized yet. You are not what I expected from a Lovegood, he said. My mother was better, Luna said simply. I'm working on it. Dumbledore arrived. The duel that followed between Dumbledore and Voldemort was something that would be written about for decades, the 2 most powerful wizards of their age, performing magic at levels that the Ministry atrium was not designed to contain. Harry watched it and felt the mark on his arm burning, not with the urgency of direct threat but with the attention of something that knew the situation was not resolved and was ready. Voldemort, mid-duel, attempted to possess Harry. It lasted less than 2 seconds. What stopped it was not Harry's will alone, although his will was considerable. What stopped it was that Voldemort encountered, inside the connection he was forcing, not a single consciousness to overwhelm but something that moved differently than a single mind, the same resonance that had stopped Quirrell's hands in first year, but 4 years deeper, 4 years more practiced, 3 marks burning in 3 people standing within 10 feet of each other. Voldemort withdrew from the possession attempt the way he'd left Quirrell, not with defeat, but with the expression of someone revising a fundamental premise. Not yet, he said. It was not clear whether he was speaking to Harry or to himself. Then he was gone, and the Aurors were flooding in, and the Ministry atrium was suddenly full of witnesses, and the thing that Fudge had spent a year denying was standing right in front of him in the form of 20 Aurors who had just seen what they'd just seen. Harry stood in the atrium, Hermione on his left with a cut above her eyebrow and a look on her face that was exhausted and alive, Luna on his right with her hair completely undone and her wand arm at her side but ready, and looked at Fudge looking at him. Fudge's face went through several things. Then he said, in a voice that had all the air taken out of it, "He's back." "Yes," Harry said. "He is." The years lie crumbled in the specific way systems crumble when reality finally makes denial too expensive, quickly, loudly, and with the particular embarrassment of people who are suddenly trying to position themselves on the correct side of something they actively prevented anyone from addressing for 12 months. Umbridge was recalled to the ministry the next morning. McGonagall wrote the letter, and it had been drafted long before that morning, and it cited documented evidence and formal complaints and the specific language of the 1947 decree, and it was signed by 17 current and former students and 4 parents. Harry heard about the recall from Ron, who heard it from his father. He was sitting in the hospital wing at the time, Hermione beside him reading something she'd found on the book cart, Luna cross-legged on the end of his bed doing her far-listening thing. "Umbridge is gone," Ron said from the doorway, with the bright, uncomplicated satisfaction of someone whose family's well-being has been directly threatened by the person leaving. "Good," Harry said. "What happens now?" Ron asked. Harry looked at the window. Outside, June was doing its extravagant thing with the Hogwarts grounds, all that green light and the lake going silver in the afternoon. The year was nearly over. The war had stopped being deniable. Voldemort was back in the open and the world would have to respond to that, and everything that had been built quietly in unused classrooms and over enchanted coins and in the long patience of 3 people who had known what was coming for 4 years, all of it was now the foundation for something that had to be visible. "Now," Harry said, "we stop being quiet about it." The mark on his arm was warm and clear and absolutely steady. Chapter 6, The End of the Game. The war did not arrive with a declaration. It arrived the way most true things arrive, incrementally, then all at once, in the space between 2 breaths. The summer after 5th year was the last summer that felt like anything other than a countdown. Harry spent it at Grimmauld Place, which Sirius had opened without the performative reluctance of someone doing a favor and with the straightforward warmth of someone who has decided that openness is the only sane response to having spent 12 years in Azkaban. Sirius Black was not, it turned out, particularly broken. He was exactly as sane and inappropriate and fiercely loyal as the fragmentary memories of Remus Lupin's stories had suggested, and he and Harry had spent 3 weeks of June getting to know each other with the specific quality of people who are both aware that time is a limited resource and should not be wasted on performance. Hermione arrived in July with 2 trunks and the organized efficiency of someone who has decided to treat the headquarters of an anti-Voldemort resistance as a research facility that also happens to have bedrooms. Luna arrived with her father, who stayed for dinner, talked to Sirius for 4 hours about a story he was writing about Azkaban's magical architecture, and then left with 17 pages of notes and an interview appointment for August. Ron was already there, him and Ginny both, and the house had the texture of a place where a great deal of important and practical work was being done by people who were also, in the margins of that work, being 17 and alive and aware of each other. Harry sat in the library on the 3rd floor, not the Hogwarts library, Grimmauld Place's library, which was considerably darker in its reading material and considerably more useful for the current situation, and worked his way through the Black family archive with the methodical focus that had served him since age 9. The archive was a specific kind of education. The Black family had been in proximity to the darkest elements of wizarding history for generations, which meant their private library contained primary sources that no school curriculum would ever touch. He was reading about Horcruxes on a Tuesday evening in the 2nd week of July when Hermione knocked on the open door. "You found it," she said, reading his face. "The diary," Harry said. "2nd year. That wasn't just an artifact of riddles. It was a fragment of his soul." Hermione sat down across from him. The window was open and the London summer was doing its warm, complicated thing outside. She looked at the book in his hands and then at his face with the full attention she brought to things that had changed the shape of a problem. "How many?" "Unknown. 7 is, the text suggests 7 as the theoretically complete fragmentation. He would have gone to 7 if he could." Harry set the book flat on the table. "We know the diary. Dumbledore has suspected at least 2 others. There's a ring, his grandfather's, that Dumbledore found last year. He destroyed it." He paused. "He was injured doing it. His hand." Hermione was already doing the calculation he'd done 3 minutes ago. That's why he's been managing the year differently. The injury from the ring, it's spreading. He's dying, Harry said. It came out level, because he'd had 20 minutes with it and had arrived at level. Not this year. But he's on a timeline. Luna appeared in the doorway. She had the uncanny habit of arriving at conversations when they had reached their most essential point, which Harry had long since stopped attributing to coincidence and started attributing to the same instinct that let her hear things through walls. She looked between them. Horcruxes, she said. Yes, Harry said. She came in and sat beside Hermione. My mother's notes, the ones I haven't shared yet because I was waiting for the right context. She found references to soul-splitting magic in 3 separate preministry texts. She believed someone had actually done it. She was following the research when she died. She paused, and the portable grief moved across her face and settled. I think she was getting close to the same conclusion you just reached. The 3 of them sat with this in the library at Grimmauld Place, the summer evening outside, the war inside the room in the shape of a book and a dead woman's research and a dying headmaster's burned hand. We tell Dumbledore we know, Harry said. Not to ask his permission to act on it. To tell him that we are acting on it and that we would rather do it with whatever he knows than without. He's been keeping the Horcrux information back, Hermione said. He has a reason. He has several reasons, Harry said. Some of them are good and some of them are the old habit of managing information to manage people. We tell him that the information management is over. He tells us everything or we work from what we have. We can work from what we have, Luna said. It will just take longer. We tell him, Harry said. Because that's the honest thing to do, and I have decided that honesty with Dumbledore, even when it's uncomfortable, is better than the alternative. He paused. He's been trying. He's not the person he was in first year. No, Hermione agreed. He's not. Which doesn't erase the past. But it shapes how we operate going forward. They went to see Dumbledore the next day, and the meeting in the headmaster's office was the most direct conversation Harry had ever had with the man, which was saying something given the conversation about Umbridge in 5th year. Harry set the book on the desk and told Dumbledore what he knew, and Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment with those blue eyes that had changed over 5 years from the performed warmth of a man managing an asset to the real attention of someone who had arrived, slowly and not without pain, at something closer to respect. Dumbledore told them everything. It took 3 hours. The Horcruxes, the locations, the ones already destroyed and the ones still remaining. The prophecy in full, which Harry heard with the complete attention of someone receiving information rather than receiving a verdict. He sat through the full text without flinching and at the end said, the part that says I must be the one to kill him, that presupposes a version of this where I'm operating alone. Yes, Dumbledore said. That version doesn't exist. No, Dumbledore said. I know that now. Does the prophecy work if the 3 of us are involved? Dumbledore looked at his burned hand, which he kept covered but which all of them had noticed for 2 years. The prophecy describes a power that Voldemort doesn't know. I initially interpreted that as your mother's sacrifice and the protection it produced. He paused. I now believe the prophecy was written in the full awareness of something much older than Lily Potter's sacrifice. Ancient magic doesn't operate by the rules prophecies assume. It writes its own. He looked at Harry. The power he doesn't know is the Covenant. He has encountered it twice and he still doesn't fully understand it because he has spent his entire life believing that power is a singular thing, held by one person, pointed in one direction. And it's not, Hermione said. It is not, Dumbledore agreed. He looked between the 3 of them with the expression of a man who has revised his model of the world and is finding the new model, despite everything, better than the old one. The prophecy will be fulfilled by whoever is in front of Voldemort when his final protection fails. That will be Harry, the direct connection, the scar, the brother wands, but it will not be Harry alone. That distinction matters enormously. What are the remaining Horcruxes? Harry said. Dumbledore told them. Sixth year was the year they stopped attending classes in any recognizable way. They attended. They sat in lessons. They took their NEWTS with the focused preparation of people who consider academic excellence a form of respect for themselves. Hermione received the highest marks in charms and transfiguration that Hogwarts had recorded in 30 years. Luna's defense NEWT practical component produced a result that Flitwick, brought in to assist with assessment, described in writing as unprecedented in scope and elegance. Harry passed everything and received outstandings in defense, charms, and care of magical creatures and exceeds expectations in everything else, and the marks were true and earned and not the point. The point was what happened outside class. The Horcrux hunt operated in the gaps, weekends, holidays, the long nights when the castle had its own agenda and 3 students with covenant marks and 4 years of DA training and a dying headmaster's complete intelligence briefing had theirs. They worked with Dumbledore directly now, which was a different relationship than any they'd had with him before. He was not managing them. He was, with the specific effort of someone dismantling a very old habit, working with them, deferring on strategic questions where their judgment had proven clearer, providing context and history where his greater age was genuinely useful. It was not without friction. He was still Dumbledore, still inclined toward the oblique approach, still operating with the deeply ingrained instinct of a man who had been the only adult in most rooms for 50 years. There were arguments. Harry had 3 in October alone, 2 about methodology and 1 about whether Slughorn should be informed of the full Horcrux situation or managed more carefully. Harry's position was that Slughorn deserved honesty because he was going to be needed for honesty, and lying to an ally as preparation for relying on their courage was structurally inconsistent. Dumbledore's position was that Slughorn's particular psychology required careful handling. His psychology, Harry said, requires being treated like someone whose contribution matters. Which it does. Which is the same thing as treating him honestly. He looked at Dumbledore across the desk. You managed him into giving you the false memory. He knows that now. He can feel it. The way to get the real memory is to ask for it directly and tell him exactly why it matters. A long pause. You should talk to him, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry agreed. I will. He did, and the real memory arrived in Dumbledore's pensieve the following week, and the content of it, the full conversation between Tom Riddle and Horace Slughorn about Horcrux creation, was colder and more specific than the false version and was exactly as useful as Harry had known it would be. The Horcruxes fell one by one through 6th year with the careful, methodical quality of work done by people who are not rushing and are not underestimating the task. The locket, Slytherin's, required a visit to a cave that Dumbledore had identified through the memory evidence, which they made in December, all 3 of them and Dumbledore, and the inferi in the dark water were a specific kind of horror that Harry met with the understanding that horror was something you moved through rather than away from. Luna's light, when she cast it in that cave, was the cold tone that made shadows behave differently, and it held the inferi at the perimeter while Hermione crossed to retrieve the locket with the complete composure of someone who has chosen to be braver than their circumstances. They came back from the cave with the locket. Dumbledore, who had been weakened by the potion in the stone basin, recovered slowly and imperfectly, and Harry understood by January that the recovery was less complete than the previous years had been, and that the timeline he'd identified in summer was moving faster than any of them had planned for. The cup, Hufflepuff's, was in Bellatrix Lestrange's Gringotts vault. This took 2 months to plan, 1 week to execute, and involved the specific goblin contact Luna's father had established 3 years earlier, a carefully negotiated arrangement that bypassed the Ministry entirely on the grounds that Gringotts operated under its own jurisdiction, and the most technically complex magical infiltration Harry had ever attempted. He, Hermione, and Luna walked out of Gringotts on a dragon's back, which was not in any plan any of them had drafted, and landed in the Scottish countryside with the laughter that comes from surviving something genuinely ridiculous, and the cup in Hermione's bag, and the knowledge that they were down to 2. The diadem, Ravenclaw's, was in the castle itself. Luna found it. Of course she found it, because Luna had been listening to the castle since first year in the way Harry had been feeling it through his hands on stone, and the room of requirement, which the diadem had been hidden in for centuries, opened for her the way it opened for need, and she walked in and walked out in 6 minutes with the diadem in her hand and the expression of someone completing a task they'd been building toward for a long time. "That's the room of requirement," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "You've been in there before." "Several times. It's a good room for listening." She held up the diadem. "The castle knows where everything is. You just have to ask correctly." That left two. Nagini, the snake, which was Voldemort's living Horcrux and which would need to die in proximity to Voldemort himself. And the last one, which Dumbledore had worked toward telling them all year in the way of someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and needs to set it down. He told them in March. Harry was a Horcrux. The night Voldemort had tried to kill him and failed, a fragment of soul had attached to the only living thing in the room. The killing curse had split Voldemort's already fractured soul and a sliver had embedded itself in the scar. It had been there for 15 years. It was, by every magical principle Dumbledore could establish, a Horcrux. Harry sat in the headmaster's office and received this information with the stillness of someone who had been managing large information for 6 years. Hermione's hand found his on the arm of the chair. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Luna said, from the chair on his other side, "Does it need to die the same way the others died?" "There is a specific mechanism," Dumbledore said. He was looking at Harry with the expression he had worn since 6th year began, the one that Harry had decided was genuine and not performance, because he'd had 5 years to learn the difference in this man's face. Something very close to love. The love of someone who had made specific choices with a specific child's life and was living now in full sight of the cost of those choices. The killing curse, applied to Harry, would destroy the fragment without, "No," Hermione said. "The soul fragment, not Harry." "Harry's own magical protection, how certain are you?" Harry said. Dumbledore paused. "Reasonably." "That is not a satisfying number," Ron said, from the doorway, where he had been standing because he had followed them and no one had told him not to. His voice was flat and entirely stripped of his usual lightness. "Reasonably certain that Harry doesn't die is not good enough." "Ron," Harry said. "I'm serious." "I know you are." Harry looked at Dumbledore. "What's the mechanism exactly? Walk me through the specific magical theory." Dumbledore walked him through it. The protection his mother had created was still active, not in the blood protection that had died with the Dursley connection when Harry came of age, but in the original enchantment, the covenant between a mother and her child that was ancient magic in itself, predating any wizard's understanding of it. The killing curse would strike the fragment. Harry's own protection would, theoretically, with high probability, shelter the host. "High probability," Hermione said. "The highest I can calculate." Harry looked at his hands. He thought about the mirror in first year and how he'd looked at it once and walked away, because he understood that desiring what couldn't be changed was a different thing from being willing to act on what could. He thought about his mother, who had stood between him and something that believed nothing could stop it. He thought about what Luna had said in the library on the 4th floor in first year, grief should be portable. He thought about the mark on his arm, which had been patient and steady for 15 years and was steady now. "I'm not going to Voldemort to be killed," he said. "I'm going to Voldemort to end this. If the fragment dies in the process, that's the process." He looked at Dumbledore. "Is there a way to do this where I control the terms of the encounter?" Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "If you were to offer yourself, willingly, in the full understanding of what it means, the magic that governs it is voluntary. The protective enchantment strengthens with willing sacrifice, not weakens." "Like my mother," Harry said. "Like your mother," Dumbledore confirmed. "Then that's the approach." "Harry," Hermione started. "I'm not going to die," he said, and he said it with the complete certainty of someone reporting a conclusion they've arrived at through evidence rather than hope. I'm going to walk into that forest and I'm going to let the fragment die and I'm going to walk back out. Because my mother's protection is ancient magic and it doesn't fail, and because, he looked at Hermione, then Luna, because the covenant isn't a thing that disappears when one of its parts is temporarily absent. Luna looked at him with her silver eyes. We'll feel it, she said. When it happens. I know, he said. We'll be there when you come back. I know that too, he said. The battle came on the night of May 1st, the way final things come, without a clean beginning, the world simply suddenly organized around the fact of it. Voldemort's forces arrived at Hogwarts. The wards fell in sequence, the ones Dumbledore had maintained for 30 years going down like lights being switched off in a building, and the castle responded by doing what it had been doing since September of Harry's first year, it woke up. The castle woke up in the way of something that has been patient for a very long time and has been waiting for a specific moment. The staircases moved with purpose. The doors opened and closed on a logic that served the defenders and confused the attackers. Portraits ran between frames faster than Harry had ever seen them move. The suits of armor, Dumbledore's charm, moved to the walls and held them, and the noise of 300 people defending a building that wanted to be defended was the loudest thing Harry had ever stood in the middle of. He stood in the center of it and felt completely clear. The DA, in the 2 years since its formal inception, had expanded and trained and was now a functioning defensive unit operating across all 4 houses and 6 years, and what it did in the first hour of the battle was the clearest evidence Harry had that teaching people as though they were capable had been the correct approach. Neville Longbottom led the corridors on the 7th floor with the specific authority of someone who has found, at last, the situation that matches what they've always been. Ginny coordinated the eastern wing from a position that gave her sightlines across 3 corridors and communicated through the enchanted coins with a precision that Hermione had designed and she had mastered completely. The twins, the Weasley twins, who had left school the previous year and come back for this because loyalty ran in some families like water runs downhill, held the main entrance with the specific chaotic genius of people who have been thinking about defensive magic as entertainment for their entire lives. Harry moved through the battle like the castle itself moved, not in one direction, but purposefully, responding to need rather than strategy, trusting the mark on his arm to tell him where the current was going. He found Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, which was where the vision had directed him, and he went there deliberately and willingly with the stone that turned in his hand and the voices it produced around him, his parents, Sirius's godfather warmth, Lupin's careful intelligence, and he let himself have the moment with them because some moments were not about strategy. Then he put the stone down. The moment the curse hit him, he felt it, the fragment leaving. Not gently. The scar burned with the specific final heat of something being severed from something it has been attached to for 15 years, and the world went sideways, and the forest floor came up, and he was somewhere that was not the forest and not quite anywhere else. The place was white and clean and Dumbledore was there. Dumbledore, who had died 3 months earlier, in May, not by Snape's hand but by the Horcrux's poison finally completing its work, quietly and in the company of the 3 people he had spent 6 years learning to treat as they deserved to be treated. He had died in the hospital wing with his hand in Harry's and Hermione on his other side and Luna by the window saying something soft in a language Harry didn't know, and his last clear words had been to Harry and had been, "I am sorry. And I am proud of you." Both things are true at once. In the White Place, Dumbledore looked younger than Harry had ever seen him, and more himself in some way that was hard to name, and he said, "You came voluntarily." "Yes," Harry said. "The fragment is gone." "I know." He could feel its absence, not as loss, as relief. Like putting down something heavy you hadn't known you were carrying. "You have a choice," Dumbledore said. "You can go back." "I know that too," Harry said. They were quiet for a moment in the White Place that felt like all the libraries Harry had ever been in, compressed into something without walls. "You were going to have me walk into this alone," Harry said. "Your original plan." "I was going to find this out at the end, alone, after a year of hunting Horcruxes in isolation and grief, and I was going to walk into the forest not knowing if I'd come back." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Would the outcome have been the same?" "The magical outcome, perhaps." A pause. "You would not have been the same. The person who walks through something like this alone and the person who walks through it held, they are different afterwards." Harry looked at him in the white place. "You were trying to protect me," he said. "Your original plan. You thought that if I didn't know about the Horcrux in me, I would be preserved, somehow. Innocent." "I was wrong," Dumbledore said. "You were afraid," Harry said. "That's different." Dumbledore was quiet. "You loved my parents," Harry said. "You loved what they could have been in a world that went differently. And you carried that, and it made you make choices about me that were about them, not about me." "Yes." It came out very low. "I forgive you for it," Harry said. "Not because it's what you want to hear. Because I have been carrying the weight of what was done to my parents my whole life, and I've decided that forgiveness is the thing that makes the weight portable rather than the thing that makes it disappear." He looked at the old man. "Luna's mother said grief should be portable. I think forgiveness is part of how that works." Dumbledore made a sound that in the white clean space was very close to grief and also close to relief. "Go back, Harry," he said. "I was already going," Harry said. He came back to the forest floor with the specific quality of someone returning to a room they stepped out of briefly. The forest was quiet in the immediate way of somewhere that has been waiting. He sat up, and the mark on his arm was blazing, not with the heat of threat or urgency, but with the specific warmth of the door opening that he had known since he was 11 years old in a sorting ceremony, which was the sensation of "we know you are here and we are here too." He stood up. He walked out of the forest. The battle's second phase found him at the castle's entrance with the specific clarity of someone who has been through the thing and is now on the other side of it. Voldemort was in the courtyard with his forces, Hogwarts' defenders arrayed against them with the battered, bloody quality of people who have been fighting for 3 hours and haven't stopped. Harry stepped through the castle doors and the courtyard went still. Not because he announced himself. Because Hermione and Luna were already there, had been there, coordinating the defense with the steady authority of people who had felt through the mark what had happened in the forest and had held the line in the interim with the absolute certainty that the line needed to hold and that holding it was possible. When he stepped through the doors they both looked at him, and the look said everything that didn't need to be said, and then they moved to flank him with the triangle formation they'd been in since first year. Voldemort looked at the three of them. The red eyes moved across them with the cold intelligence that had always been behind them, and Harry watched the calculation running, the same calculation that had been running since the first time Voldemort had encountered the Covenant in Quirrell's body 15 years ago, updated now with the full context of what had just happened in the forest. He had sent the killing curse into that forest. He had felt it hit. He had assumed, because he always assumed, because his model of power was singular and consuming, that it had worked the way it always worked. "Impossible," Voldemort said. It was the first time Harry had heard him say that word, and it came out differently than every other thing the man had said in their encounters, not cold, not precise, but genuinely uncomprehending. "No," Harry said. "Not impossible. Just not what you planned for." "The curse destroyed the fragment," Harry said. "The one in me. The last Horcrux, Tom. The last piece of your soul you've been hiding." He kept his voice level and his eyes clear. "Your soul isn't spread across 7 objects anymore. It's just you. You're just a person. Which means you're capable of dying." Voldemort's face moved through something that Harry had never seen there before, which was genuine fear, not tactical caution, not the adaptive intelligence revising a premise, but the specific human fear of something ending without recourse. The thing that all the Horcruxes had been designed to prevent. He had spent 60 years making himself unkillable because he was afraid of this exact moment, and the moment was here, and he was not prepared for it the way you are never prepared for the thing you have most thoroughly planned to avoid. "Your wand," Harry said, and raised his. "Brother wands, Tom. Connected. I know what happens when connected wands meet. Priori incantatem. The echoes of everyone you've killed come back. He paused. There are a great many of them. The courtyard held its breath. Voldemort raised his wand. What happened in the next 3 seconds was not the extended duel of myth and narrative. It was fast and precise and completely determined by what had been true since the beginning, that a power you don't know is, by definition, the one you can't plan against. Voldemort's killing curse left his wand. Harry's disarming spell left his. The mark on Harry's arm blazed, and from either side of him Hermione and Luna raised their wands without coordination, without discussion, without any signal, because the compact didn't require signals, it moved when it needed to move, and what moved through the three of them was not a combined spell, because there was no such thing in any textbook, because what they were doing was not in any textbook. It was ancient magic, moving through 3 channels at once, clear as the first time it had moved in a library on Cavendish Street between natural history and atlases nobody touched, certain as the first time it had been named and chosen, sovereign as the thing it had always been, not a weapon, not a tool, a truth about what 3 souls had agreed to be. The killing curse hit Harry's disarming spell and the green and red collision produced the echo, priori incantatem, the connected wands doing what connected wands do, the long chain of every soul Voldemort had ever struck coming back in the reverse order, their voices thin as light, Cedric and Harry's parents and Sirius and all the long catalogue of loss that the wizarding world had been carrying for 20 years. Voldemort's soul, intact and singular and mortal for the first time in 60 years, had no defense against what it met. He died. Not with a scream, not with a spectacular magical detonation. He died the way all mortal things die, suddenly, in a body that had stopped working, and the body fell, and what had been in it was gone, and the absence it left was enormous and clean and absolute. The silence in the courtyard lasted for about 3 seconds. Then it ended, and the ending of it was everything, shouting and crying and the specific overwhelming quality of a noise made by people who have been afraid for a very long time and are no longer afraid, which is one of the loudest noises a human being can make. Harry lowered his wand. He was standing in the same triangle formation with Hermione and Luna that he had been standing in since first year, and the marks on all 3 of their left arms were warm and steady and not blazing, because there was nothing to blaze for, because the thing that had needed doing was done. Neville appeared from the direction of the castle doors with his robes half-burnt and a cut across his face that Madame Pomfrey would close in about 20 minutes, and he looked at the place where Voldemort had been and then at Harry, and he said, "It's over." "Yes," Harry said. Ron was behind him, with Ginny, both of them in the particular state of people who have been fighting for hours and are processing that they've stopped, and Ron looked at Harry with the honest emotion he brought to everything important and didn't say anything and didn't need to. Luna turned to Harry. She looked at him with those silver eyes and said, "Your mother would have found this very interesting." Harry laughed. It came out sudden and genuine and surprised him with how full it was. "She would have," he agreed. Hermione made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob and was entirely itself, and she put her arm around Harry's shoulders with the straightforward warmth of someone who has decided that the time for reserve in the face of important things is over, and Harry leaned into it the way you lean into something solid that has been solid for a very long time. "What do we do now?" Luna asked. It was the genuine question, the forward-looking one, asked with the same unhurried curiosity she'd brought to everything since the day she'd walked between the library shelves because something had been calling her in the right direction. Harry looked at the courtyard, the defenders, the fallen, the castle behind them with its towers catching the first light of morning, the grounds going green in the May dawn, the lake a flat mirror at the edge of the grounds. He felt the castle steady and warm and familiar under his feet. He felt the mark on his arm resting at its quiet resting temperature, patient as ever, permanent as it had always been. "We rebuild," he said. "But differently. Not the system that produced this, the one where information is controlled to manage people, where power is concentrated in the hands of a few because it's more convenient that way, where children grow up not knowing what they are." He looked at Hermione. "Education, first. The curriculum." "I have a proposal," she said. I've had it since 4th year. I know you do. He looked at Luna. Your father's magazine. He'll publish everything, Luna said. Every story that's been suppressed for 20 years. He's been building the archive. A small smile. He's been building it since before I was born. He'll be delighted. The ministry needs restructuring, Harry said. Not just personnel, architecture. The Wiesengemot, the Auror Office, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the whole, we can't do all of it ourselves, Hermione said. We don't do any of it ourselves, Harry said. That's Dumbledore's mistake, over and over again, the single extraordinary person managing the situation so that no one else has to develop the capacity to manage it. We build institutions that function without us. He paused. And we stay involved, because staying involved is how you make sure the institutions stay honest. But we build them to be larger than us. The DA, Luna said. The network already exists. It does, Harry said. 300 people across 4 houses and 6 years, trained to think for themselves and defend themselves and trust each other. That's the foundation. And the goblins, Hermione said. The covenant verification from 2nd year, the formal recognition of sovereign status, that gives us legal standing independent of the ministry. Gringotts will negotiate directly with us. Which means any arrangement we make has backing that the ministry can't simply override. My father's goblin contact is very pleased about this entire situation, Luna said. The morning was fully arrived now, the May light coming across the grounds in the specifically generous way of early morning after a long night, and Hogwarts stood behind them in the first warm light with the patient permanence of something that has outlasted every storm that has ever hit it and has every intention of outlasting the ones to come. Harry turned to look at it. All 7 towers. The lake. The Forbidden Forest doing its dark and important work at the edge of things. The grounds where people were moving, helping each other, doing the first practical work of the aftermath. He thought about a library on Cavendish Street. Natural history on one side, atlases nobody touched on the other. An afternoon in July when a girl with determined hair sat down cross-legged on the floor and asked if he'd ever made something happen he couldn't explain. When another girl had arrived without announcement, following a path only she could see, and said, "You're the one, I've been looking for you since Tuesday." He thought about the mark on his left arm going bright in that library like a door opening, and the same thing appearing on the arms of 2 girls who had no reason to be there except that something older than reason had pointed them in the right direction. He thought about 9 years old, in a cupboard under the stairs, holding his arm up in the dark and watching the mark pulse and thinking, I am not nothing. I have never been nothing. Something older than everything they've tried to do to me knows what I am. He was 17 years old. He had just ended a war. He had 2 people standing beside him who had agreed, before any of them fully understood what they were agreeing to be exactly what ancient magic had called them, sovereign, equal, bound by covenant rather than by hierarchy, held together not by someone's plan but by their own choice, renewed every day. In every argument and every battle and every library and every long walk through the 4th-floor corridor talking about grief and forgiveness and what it means to carry the things you love in the right direction. The mark on his arm pulsed once, warm and certain and exactly itself. He looked at Hermione. He looked at Luna. Right, he said. Let's go build something. They walked toward the castle together, and the morning light met them 3 steps in, and the castle's torches in the entrance hall, visible through the great open doors, did one last warm and acknowledging flare. The war was over. The world was waiting. The 3 of them walked into it the way they walked into everything, together, unhurried, completely unafraid.